Tonight, we are exploring the biology of almost everything, a slow and gentle wander through the hidden patterns that allow life to appear, persist, and transform. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you're listening from, whether you're nestled under the covers, resting on your sofa, or letting this play softly beside you as the room darkens. It is a comfort knowing these words are keeping you company. A like and a subscribe would help this peaceful corner of the internet reach more people who need a moment of stillness. And for those who are already subscribed, thank you. Truly. If you would like to know when the next video drifts into the channel, tapping the little bell beneath the screen will make sure it finds you. And as for tonight's journey, I hope it is not so fascinating that it keeps you awake. Though if it does, at least you will slip into sleep with a few new ideas about how life manages to build so much from so little. Life is full of quiet miracles, and this video is an invitation to explore them slowly. Which brings us to a gentle question to begin our night. How does something as small and simple as a handful of molecules lead to everything that breathes, grows, and changes? Biology is often thought of as the study of living things, but perhaps it is better understood as the study of living patterns, the rules, rhythms, and quiet consistencies shared by all life on Earth. From the smallest cell to the broadest sweep of an ecosystem, living systems follow a deep and ancient logic. These rules are not loud or dramatic. They unfold gradually, shaping the world with patience measured in millions of years. In this slow journey, we explore these patterns one layer at a time. There is no rush, no test at the end, only a steady unfolding of how life organizes itself, how it fuels its moments, how it grows and repairs, and how it learns to adapt across the ages. Imagine walking through a dim museum where each room reveals another story. The first spark of living chemistry, the rise of cells and tissues, the quiet invention of thought, and the intricate webs that tie all organisms together. Every step opens a new perspective on how life builds the world you know. And as you sink further into stillness, you may find yourself wondering something simple yet profound. If all life begins with the same ingredients, what causes it to blossom into such endless and astonishing variety? In the beginning, the earth was quiet in a way that is almost impossible to imagine now. There were no rustling forests, no drifting birds, no creatures shifting through the night. The planet was young, wrapped in thick, hazy air that let sunlight seep through in soft, muted bands rather than the bright clarity you know today. Vast oceans stretched across the surface, deep and dark, warmed from below by restless volcanic heat. Waves rolled without witness, their edges meeting raw shorelines of cooling rock still shaped by the memory of their molten past. It was a world that felt unfinished, a stage waiting for someone to step onto it, even if that someone would not arrive in any familiar form. Down in those ancient waters, minerals dissolved slowly, stirring the seas with a rich inventory of chemical ingredients. Volcanic vents breathed warm jets of hydrogen-rich fluids into cold depths, creating pockets where energy flowed in gentle pulses. The atmosphere carried gases that had not yet learned to settle into the composition you breathe today, and sunlight filtering through the dense air touched the ocean surface with a dim golden glow. It was a planet full of potential, yet utterly empty of life. Nothing grew, nothing repaired itself, nothing copied its own structure. Everything simply existed, drifting along in a world without intention. And then, in the midst of this stillness, chemistry began to behave in ways that hinted at something new. Picture molecules as quiet dancers, bumping into one another again and again, sometimes sticking briefly, sometimes floating apart. Every moment was a small experiment. When the right shapes came together, they held for just a breath longer than usual. Bonds formed, broke, and reformed in an endless shuffle, as if the planet itself were practicing the steps of a dance it did not yet realize it would soon perform for billions of years. This was prebiotic chemistry, simple and almost accidental, yet slowly discovering new possibilities through sheer repetition. Over time, certain combinations of molecule appeared more often than others, not because they had meaning, not yet, but because the environment gently encouraged them. Heat from volcanic vents helped reactions along. Minerals on the seafloor offered surfaces where molecules could line up neatly, like guests settling into arranged seats. Shallow pools on rocky coastlines evaporated and refilled, concentrating ingredients in rhythms dictated by the rising and falling tides. With every cycle, chemistry edged closer to something capable of persistence. And persistence is the key. For life to exist, a structure must be able to continue itself, to make a version of itself again. It was this quiet requirement that reshaped the planet forever. One day, in some secluded corner of ancient Earth, a molecule discovered by chance that it could copy its own form. Not perfectly, not consistently, but enough to make more of itself before falling apart. It was no grand revelation, no sudden leap into complexity, just a small pattern learning to persist for longer than before, a whisper instead of a shout. But that whisper changed everything. Self-replication is the simplest spark of biology. It is the moment when chemistry begins to behave in ways that resemble life, even though it is not yet alive in any full sense. Once a molecule copies itself, even clumsily, the world around it starts to respond differently. Copies appear. Some linger longer, some fall apart sooner, some differ slightly from the original, and in those small differences lies the earliest hint of evolution. That was the quiet turning point. A molecule that could make more of itself had unlocked a pathway that no rock, no wave, no gust of volcanic steam had ever taken. Imagine for a moment that first self-copying molecule drifting gently in warm water near a hydrothermal vent. It did not know what it had done, because it had no awareness. It simply existed, and its structure allowed it to produce another just like it. Then perhaps another. The first copies might have fallen apart almost immediately, dissolving back into the ocean like faint ripples fading on the surface of a pond. But every so often, one would last a little longer. Each one represented a tiny extension of the same pattern, reaching timidly into the future. The conditions around these molecules mattered greatly. Hydrothermal vents were like natural laboratories, offering a perfect blend of heat, minerals, and chemical gradients. The water that poured out of them was rich with energy, and the rocky chimneys built by those vents created labyrinths of small compartments, ideal for trapping molecules long enough for reactions to repeat. Elsewhere, shallow pools warmed by the sun provided cycles of wetting and drying, allowing molecules to crowd together and react more enthusiastically. Even mineral surfaces played a role, offering orderly templates that nudged molecules into useful arrangements. Life did not begin in one place alone. It began in many places where chemistry found a foothold, where water and energy and the right ingredients aligned. It was not a single miraculous moment, but a gradual accumulation of small steps. A molecule here persisted for a heartbeat longer. Another formed a slightly more stable bond. A third learned to recruit nearby molecules into forming copies of its own structure. Each step was simple, Yet the consequences were immense. These tiny self-replicating patterns were the ancestors of everything that would eventually fill the oceans, cover the land, and breathe in the air. What makes this so astonishing is how little was required. The earliest replicators were not complex machines. They did not have membranes or proteins or elaborate metabolic cycles. They were molecular phrases written in the language of chemistry, repeating themselves because the conditions allowed them to do so. And that repetition, no matter how imperfect, created continuity. Continuity created variation. Variation created the opportunity for selection, and selection created the long, slow drift toward complexity. At the time, of course, none of this looked remarkable. The earth was still a world of empty seas and barren rocks. No creature swam. No plant reached toward the sun. No voice echoed across the landscape. Yet beneath the water surface the planet had begun its quiet transformation. Life was not here yet, not fully, but the ingredients had started to arrange themselves into something that could eventually wake, grow, and change. It is humbling to imagine how the first flicker of life was not a dramatic event but a gentle one. A molecule learned how to hold its shape. Then it learned how to make a partner that resembled it. That partner learned to persist as well. The world did not celebrate, but everything that followed, from forests to coral reefs to the beating of your own heart, traces back to that quiet achievement. Chemistry became persistent chemistry. Persistent chemistry became evolving chemistry, and evolving chemistry became life. As you settle further into this moment of stillness, it is worth holding on to one simple idea. All of life, every creature and every cell, begins with the ability to copy a pattern. The first replicator did not need to understand what it was doing. It simply existed in an environment that favoured its continuation. That was enough to start something that would one day ripple across continents, oceans, and even through the thoughts of the beings now listening to this story. And so, from a world without movement or memory, without voices or visions, a new kind of order began to unfold. It began in small steps, in crowded pools and warm vents, in molecules learning slowly to hold hands. Those first copies were humble, but their legacy stretches to everything that breathes or grows today. It leads eventually to the tapestry of life itself, woven from a pattern that started as nothing more than a flicker in the dark. In those early oceans, chemistry was still experimenting with itself, trying combinations the way a breeze might shuffle scattered leaves. At first, each reaction was a brief event, a fleeting encounter that produced a molecule which then drifted away and vanished back into the background. Nothing lasted long enough to matter. Nothing created momentum. These were one-off moments, like sparks that glimmer and then fade without lighting anything around them. The Earth was full of potential but lacked continuity, and continuity is the quiet thread that turns accidents into something more meaningful. Over time, however, certain reactions began to occur not just randomly but repeatedly. The environment itself nudged them along. Heat from beneath the seafloor encouraged some chemical interactions, while cooling currents encouraged others. Minerals lining rock surfaces guided molecules into orderly arrangements. With each cycle of tides, evaporation, and rehydration, the same ingredients met again in familiar ways. Patterns began to form, not yet alive, but behaving in a manner that hinted, just faintly, at persistence. This is where chemistry started learning a new skill, the ability to continue. Rather than producing isolated structures that disappeared immediately, some reactions created molecules that helped the same reactions happen again. These loops, known as autocatalytic networks, worked like gentle circles of encouragement. A molecule would form, and that molecule made the next step in the sequence more likely, which made the next step more likely still, until the entire process had a small but steady rhythm. Imagine a group of musicians warming up, each note making it easier for the next to follow, until a kind of accidental harmony settles into place. In these networks, chemistry became self-supporting. Once a small loop started, it could sustain itself as long as its ingredients were available. The pattern did not have awareness, but it did have a kind of structure, a tendency to continue. Persistence was no longer an unlikely fluke. It had become the natural outcome of the right environment shaping the right reactions, and once persistence appears, even in its simplest form, the world becomes a different place. Some molecular patterns held together longer than others. Some were more stable, resisting the chaotic push of heat and motion for a few moments more. Others broke apart quickly, leaving no trace. This difference in stability mattered. In an environment where countless molecular shapes were constantly being tried, only those that lasted long enough could influence the cycles around them. This is selective stability, the earliest form of success in a world without organisms. It did not yet resemble survival, because there were no living creatures to survive, but it set the stage for everything that would eventually emerge. Imagine a tiny cluster of molecules that happen to reinforce each other. Each one makes it slightly easier for the others to form. If one disappears, the pattern weakens, but as long as enough of them are present, the loop continues. The cluster becomes a sort of chemical community, a group of participants keeping the reaction cycle alive. The longer these networks persist, the more chances they have to grow, shift, or discover new chemical partners drifting by in the water. Over many cycles, these networks gain a subtle kind of presence in the environment. They become features rather than accidents. Eventually, some of these networks found themselves trapped inside small enclosures. Fatty molecules floating in the ancient seas naturally formed tiny bubbles, like delicate balloons with watery centres. These bubbles, known as protocells, created protected spaces where chemical reactions could happen without being washed away instantly. Inside them, autocatalytic networks had the opportunity to stabilize even further. In these miniature chambers, molecules experience something like privacy from the chaotic outside world. The beauty of protocells is that they did not need to be built intentionally. Fatty molecules naturally arrange themselves into spheres because it is the simplest and most stable shape for them. The early Earth was likely full of bubbles forming and dissolving again. Occasionally a bubble enclosed a set of molecules that interacted in just the right way. Those molecules, sheltered from disruption, could carry on their cycles a little longer. Persistence gained a physical home. It is easy to imagine these early protocells as nature's first attempt at rooms. They had walls, they had contents, and they held on to those contents long enough for reactions to repeat. Inside them, chemical patterns that might have dissolved instantly elsewhere could stabilize and even grow in number. The protocell itself did not live, but it provided a space where the earliest hints of life could begin to take shape. If a protocell happened to divide when the water stirred it, each half carried some of its internal patterns with it. That was not reproduction, not yet, but it was surprisingly close. Persistence began to act with the faintest whisper of selection. Patterns that continued for longer dominated more of their surroundings. Patterns that consistently fell apart never gained the chance to influence anything. Over many cycles, the stable ones accumulated, becoming the quiet winners in a world that had not yet invented winning. Chemistry had started to behave as if guided by rules, even though the only rule was that endurance creates opportunity. As these chemical loops continued, small variations emerged. A molecule formed with a slightly different shape. It reacted a little faster or a little slower. It made the network a bit more efficient or a bit clumsier. Each variation changed the way the entire cycle behaved. Some versions faded quickly, others lingered, and a few quietly flourished. This gentle sorting of possibilities created something that would eventually become evolution, the gradual favouring of persistent patterns over fragile ones. It is remarkable to consider that evolution began long before life as you know it. It started with chemistry selecting for stability, for patterns that could keep themselves going despite the restless environment. There were no organisms competing, no predators or prey, no struggle for survival, just loops of reactions trying out variations, with the most durable ones slowly becoming more common. This was evolution in its simplest and earliest form, a soft drift rather than a contest. The transition from random reactions to steady cycles did not happen suddenly. It unfolded over long spans of time, guided by the landscape of the early Earth. Hydrothermal vents offered warm pockets where reactions could flourish. Shallow pools dried and refilled, providing concentration and variation. Minerals lined up molecules in helpful ways. Every part of the environment nudged chemistry toward persistence, and once patterns learned how to last, they opened the door to everything that followed. Looking back, it is tempting to imagine a clear threshold where non-living chemistry became the foundation for living systems. But the reality was far gentler. Chemistry did not leap into life. It simply became more organized, more stable, more capable of continuing itself. Persistence created structure. Structure created opportunity. Opportunity led to novelty. And novelty eventually led to the emergence of the first true ancestors of all biological processes. If you could observe this ancient world, it would not look like a laboratory of discoveries. It would appear quiet and unchanging. Bubbles rising from vents, minerals shimmering on the seabed, pools evaporating in the sun. Yet within those still scenes, tiny loops of reactions were growing more confident in their ability to repeat. They were small enough to be invisible, yet significant enough to reshape the future of the planet. In the grand story of life, persistence was the first triumph. Not intelligence, not complexity, not movement, but the simple ability to continue, to hold a pattern long enough that it could influence the next moment. That was the true beginning, the shift from a world of accidents to a world shaped by enduring forms. It was chemistry teaching itself how to remain, and in learning that, it laid the foundation for everything that would one day breathe, grow, think, and feel. In those ancient waters where molecules drifted like tiny fragments of thought, something subtle began to change. Chemistry had already learned how to persist, forming loops of reactions that supported themselves for longer and longer stretches of time. But persistence alone was not enough to create the rich variety that would someday shape forests, coral reefs, and every living creature that now walks, swims, or floats through the world. For that, something new had to emerge, the quiet introduction of change. Imagine a smooth pond at dawn. You toss in a single pebble, and one set of ripples spreads outward in perfect circles. If you toss in another pebble that is just slightly different in shape, or let it land at a different angle, the ripples will shift ever so gently. They might be broader or fainter, or travel a little farther. Each ripple is still a ripple, still recognizable, but never quite identical to the one before. In this peaceful image lies the beginning of variation, the soft heartbeat of evolution. Early molecules capable of copying themselves behaved much like these ripples. The first replicators, which may have resembled the single-stranded molecules known as RNA today, were not precise machines. They copied themselves the way a hand might trace a pattern in sand. Recognizable, but with small quirks appearing each time. A slight shift in shape here, an altered bond there. Most of these irregularities faded quietly into the background, but some lingered. Some of them changed the way the molecules behaved. These small differences were not mistakes in the way you might think of errors today. They were simply the natural result of imperfect copying occurring in a warm, restless ocean. Yet these imperfections changed everything. Without them, every molecule would remain identical, repeating endlessly with no room for novelty. With them, new possibilities emerged. One version might fold in a slightly more stable shape. Another might take less time to form. Another might interact with surrounding molecules in a more favourable way. Each variation set off its own quiet ripple through the chemical environment. Inheritance entered the picture in the gentlest possible way. When a molecule with a slight difference copied itself, that difference carried forward into its descendants, if they could be called descendants at this early stage. Patterns that formed once began to form again. The future started to remember the past, not perfectly, but enough that the story of these molecules began to stretch across time rather than flickering out in moments. With inheritance, a pattern no longer belonged to a single instant. It could travel forward, shaping the world one replication at a time. Then came selection, the simplest yet most powerful influence in all of biology. Selection did not choose with intention. It had no awareness, no preference. It was simply the natural outcome of certain molecular forms lasting longer than others, or copying more quickly, or interacting more helpfully with neighbouring ingredients. If a variation made a molecule more stable, that molecule lingered in the environment for a few breaths longer. If it made copying easier, more copies appeared. And if it made the molecule fall apart instantly, it vanished without leaving a trace. In this gentle sorting of possibilities, evolution took its first slow steps. It is tempting to imagine evolution as a fierce competition, but in its earliest form it was almost serene. There were no predators. There was no struggle between organisms for food or space, because organisms did not yet exist. Selection was simply the environment favouring certain molecular shapes over others. It was a soft guiding hand, not a battle. The ocean encouraged stability, encouraged efficient copying, encouraged the persistence of networks that worked slightly better than their neighbours. Over long stretches of time, these slight advantages accumulated, nudging the entire system toward complexity. Errors in replication became the engines of diversity. Without these small missteps, life would have been nothing more than a perfectly repeating pattern. Beautiful, perhaps, but unchanging. It is the slight departures from perfection that open the door to innovation. A molecule that accidentally folded into a shape that made reactions faster gained more opportunities to influence the chemistry around it. A variation that allowed a molecule to withstand heat added resilience to its network. Even the quirks that offered no immediate benefit contributed to the pool of possibilities, waiting quietly for a moment when the environment might shift in their favour. This relationship between error and invention continues through all of biology. What looks like a flaw becomes a spark of creativity. What seems like a tiny deviation becomes a starting point for new paths. Every living thing today carries within it the legacy of ancient molecules trying out new arrangements. stumbling into shapes that opened unexpected doors, and evolution kept sculpting, not with hands or intention, but with time itself. Time is the secret ingredient in this story. Without haste, without urgency, the early Earth offered patience measured not in days or centuries, but in millions and millions of years. These molecules drifted, reacted, copied, and varied through spans of time so vast that human language struggles to describe them. Imagine the slow wearing down of mountains, the steady shifting of continents, the rhythmic breathing of tides repeating over and over again. Evolution unfolded at this pace, shaped by cycles far longer than any one life could ever perceive. In this enormous expanse of time, the earliest replicators had room to experiment. Each new variation had countless opportunities to prove itself or fade into stillness. Even the smallest advantage, appearing only once in 1,000 replications, could become meaningful when given the space of millions of cycles. Nature did not rush. It simply waited for the patterns that endured. Over long stretches, the replicators that produced more stable structures began to dominate. Their networks expanded, interacting with other molecules in increasingly intricate ways. Some variations made copying faster or more accurate. Others improved the ability of molecules to gather ingredients. Some enabled reactions that had never been possible before. Step by slow step, the chemistry of the early Earth grew more capable, more organized, more confident in its ability to continue. Evolution became the quiet sculptor behind all this unfolding. It shaped molecules into networks and networks into systems, all without intention or direction. Selection rewarded patterns that persisted. Variation ensured that new possibilities were always waiting in the wings. Inheritance allowed every improvement to ripple forward. Together, these three simple forces set in motion the long story of life. If you look at this process closely, it reveals something unexpectedly poetic. Life does not spring from a single miracle, but from the accumulation of countless tiny changes. Each variation adds a brush stroke. Each moment of stability adds structure. Each inheritance adds continuity. Over immense spans of time, those brushstrokes become shapes, then forms, then beings capable of sensing, moving, thinking, and exploring. Evolution is the gentle, patient craftsman guiding these transformations, shaping the flow of life without ever needing to lift a tool. The early Earth gave evolution the most valuable gift it could offer: time in overwhelming abundance. With billions of years to work quietly, even the smallest chemical improvement became the foundation for something greater. It is this length of time that allowed a world of simple replicators to give rise to cells, tissues, organisms, and eventually the vast symphony of ecosystems that blanket the planet. All of it emerged from those first quiet moments when molecules drifted in warm water, making imperfect copies of themselves. As you rest here, listening to this story unfold in gentle layers, it is worth reflecting that life began not as something grand, but as a whisper. It began with chemistry, learning how to vary, how to remember, and how to favour the patterns that endured. These early steps did not look like evolution at the time, yet they were the beginning of everything that would later take shape. And through them, the world slowly transformed from a silent ocean of possibilities into a living planet where diversity flourishes in countless forms. Evolution was born in the softest of ways, through the quiet persistence of patterns and the graceful acceptance of imperfection. Those small ripples that once drifted through ancient seas have now become the waves of life that cover the earth. Each one a reminder that creativity often begins with a gentle deviation, and that time itself is the greatest sculptor of all. Life changed forever the moment chemistry learned how to build a room. Before that, everything happened out in the open. Molecules drifted freely, reactions sparked and faded, and even the most promising patterns were constantly washed away by the endless motion of the early oceans. But then, gradually and almost accidentally, small enclosed spaces began to appear. These tiny compartments, built from naturally forming fatty molecules, created little islands where chemistry could pause, gather, and try out new arrangements without being instantly scattered. These were the first cells, the smallest possible rooms where life could begin to find its footing. A cell is a boundary, a gentle separation between the inside and the outside. That boundary is the membrane, a soft and flexible layer made of molecules that instinctively arrange themselves into thin, smooth sheets. They form because it is the simplest way for certain molecules to shield their water-loving parts from the surrounding environment while keeping their water-avoiding parts tucked neatly inside. Without any intention at all, they fold into bubbles, sometimes only a fraction of a millimeter wide. These bubbles became enclosed spaces where the earliest chemical networks could concentrate, repeat, and flourish. Membranes may seem delicate, but they are quietly powerful. They hold everything together, allowing the inside of the cell to differ from the outside. They let certain molecules pass through while keeping others out. They bend, stretch, and reshape themselves with remarkable ease. In many ways, a membrane behaves a little like a soap bubble with rules. It can wobble, expand, or pinch without bursting, and that flexibility gave early life the freedom to grow, divide, and explore new environments. Without membranes, chemistry would still be drifting through oceans. With them, life gained rooms of its own. Inside these rooms, something extraordinary happened. Chemical processes that once flickered briefly across rocky surfaces began to form organized flows. Instead of vanishing into the sea, molecules stayed close, reacting again and again in a shared space. The interior of a cell, known as cytoplasm, might look simple at first glance, like a clear gel, but it is busy in a quiet way, full of tiny structures drifting around, bumping into one another, and performing tasks that keep the cell functioning. Enzymes help reactions along, nutrients arrive and are transformed, and waste products are gently carried toward the edges to be released. It is a choreography without dancers, an orchestra without musicians, guided not by intention but by the natural laws of chemistry playing out in close quarters. This organized bustle is what made life possible. Within the protected boundaries of a cell, reactions could occur in steady sequences, building new molecules, breaking down others, and maintaining a delicate balance. Each cell became a world unto itself, holding the ingredients necessary for growth and replication. Chemistry inside a cell no longer relied on chance encounters. It had a place, a setting, a stable environment where the same sequences could unfold reliably over and over. This cell turned randomness into rhythm. The earliest cells were simple, but simple does not mean fragile. These ancient pioneers were prokaryotes, a word that refers to organisms whose cells lack a nucleus. They did not have separate rooms within their rooms. Everything happened in the same open space inside their membrane. Yet they were astonishingly resilient. They survived in boiling waters, icy crusts, deep ocean vents, and rocky surfaces exposed to fierce ultraviolet light. They endured conditions far more extreme than anything most modern organisms could tolerate. And they did all this with a minimalist design that has remained successful for billions of years. Prokaryotes are often described as primitive, but that label is misleading. They are efficient, resourceful, and engineered by natural processes to thrive in environments that would challenge even the hardiest of modern forms of life. Their simplicity is part of their strength. Without complex internal structures to maintain, they can grow quickly, adapt swiftly, and replicate with remarkable speed. Even today, many of them can be found in the deepest oceans, the driest deserts, the coldest ice sheets, and the hottest volcanic springs. They are the quiet champions of survival. Inside these prokaryotic cells, reactions formed cycles that supported one another. Some molecules helped harvest energy. Others stitched together essential building blocks. Others repaired damage from heat or radiation. Even without distinct organelles, their interior remained organized enough to support all the processes needed for persistence. Each cell carried the ability to build its parts, manage its energy, protect its boundaries, and replicate its structure. It was chemistry that had learned to look after itself. Once cells appeared, life gained stability it had never known before. Chemical patterns that once relied on lucky environmental conditions could now continue inside their own protected chambers. The ocean still influenced them, but no longer controlled every moment of their existence. A protocell might drift into warmer waters or bump against a mineral surface, but the reactions inside continued with far greater reliability than before. Cells created consistency, and consistency allowed life to build upon itself. With the arrival of cells, the world changed quietly but profoundly. Instead of molecules reacting in scattered pockets, reactions became concentrated. Instead of patterns disappearing instantly, they endured. Instead of chemistry remaining diffuse, it became localized, repeating within compartments that could replicate and spread. Life had gained a foothold in the chaos of the ancient earth, and from that foothold it would gradually climb toward greater complexity. These tiny rooms were more than shelters. They were seeds of possibility. Each cell carried within it the power to copy its structure, share its patterns with offspring, and spread across new environments. Cells drifted into new regions, carrying the chemistry of persistence with them. When they divided, their inner patterns were passed along, giving rise to lineages that could stretch across unimaginable spans of time. A single ancient cell might be the ancestor of countless descendants, each bearing a trace of the same organizational principles. It is surprisingly poetic to think about how much depends on these small enclosed spaces. Every organism on the planet, from simple microbes to towering forests and thinking brains, relies on the same basic architecture. A membrane wrapped around a set of processes that maintain themselves. You are, in a way, a community of countless such rooms, each one performing its part in the quiet symphony of life inside you. All of them trace their ancestry back to these early pioneers that dared to enclose themselves from the world outside. As cells multiplied and spread, the earth slowly filled with these resilient islands. They floated through oceans, clung to rocks, settled in vents, and spread across surfaces that had once been empty. Their presence began shaping the planet itself. They altered the chemistry of oceans, influenced the composition of the atmosphere, and built the groundwork upon which all later life would rely. Cells did not just survive, they transformed their environment, making the world more hospitable for future generations. The arrival of cells marks a quiet threshold in the history of life. Before them, reactions happened only where conditions were perfect. After them, reactions could happen anywhere the cell drifted. Before them, patterns were fleeting. After them, patterns could endure and replicate. Cells made life portable, stable, and capable of expanding into new corners of the planet. Each one was a tiny sheltered workshop where chemistry could try new ideas, refine old ones, and preserve the ones that worked. These little rooms were humble in size but mighty in influence. They gave life structure, boundaries, and stability. They allowed the earliest living systems to grow in number, spread across the globe, and set the stage for all the richness that would follow. And as you imagine those early cells drifting through warm waters, tiny islands of organization in an ocean of chaos, it becomes clear how profoundly they changed the planet. They were the first places where chemistry could truly settle down, take a breath in its own protected space, and begin the long, astonishing journey toward all the living things that fill the world today. Life had been drifting along in its simple, single-celled form for an astonishing span of time. These early cells were sturdy, resourceful, and capable of surviving in environments that would make most modern organisms politely decline. They fed themselves, protected their boundaries, and carried out the basic chemistry needed to keep going. Yet for all their resilience, they were limited in what they could do. Each cell was a self-contained world, complete but solitary. Then, in one of the most transformative events in the history of biology, two cells crossed paths in a way that changed everything. It was the moment life discovered the surprising power of partnership. Endosymbiosis, the process by which one cell comes to live inside another, sounds dramatic, but the earliest version of it unfolded with a kind of gentle inevitability. Picture an ancient, hungry cell engulfing a smaller bacterial cell in the same way that cells often pulled in nutrients from their surroundings. Normally, the engulfed guest would have been broken down and recycled, but not this time. For reasons shaped by chemistry, circumstance, and a hint of luck, this smaller cell remained intact inside its host. Instead of being digested, it continued performing its own internal reactions. It kept generating energy, as it always had, even while sitting inside someone else's cellular living room. What happened next is one of the most remarkable twists in the story of life. The host cell began to benefit from the energy produced by its unexpected guest. The guest, in turn, found itself surrounded by a stable environment with a steady supply of nutrients. Neither cell could have planned this arrangement, but both gained something valuable. A kind of biological truce formed, and what began as an intake of potential food blossomed into cooperation. The two cells discovered, without intention, that life is sometimes better with company. This long-term partnership eventually gave rise to mitochondria, the ancient bacterial residents that now live inside almost every complex cell on Earth. Mitochondria are tiny, efficient energy producers. They take nutrients supplied by the host and turn them into a steady flow of usable energy, powering countless reactions that the cell could never have managed on its own. They have their own small loops of genetic material, a quiet reminder of their ancestral independence. Yet they have lived inside their host for such an unimaginable stretch of time that they are now inseparable from the cells they support. It is strange and wonderful to consider that your body, and the body of every plant, fungus, and animal, contains these tiny descendants of ancient bacteria. They sit humming gently within your cells, helping to keep you alive with unwavering dedication. They are, in a way, ancient guests who arrived billions of years ago and simply never left. Imagine a roommate who moved in during the earliest days of Earth and is still happily doing the chores. It is one of the more charming examples of nature proving that sometimes a shared living arrangement truly can improve your life. This partnership opened the door to entirely new levels of possibility. Before endosymbiosis, cells could manage only modest energy production. They were capable and efficient, but constrained by the limits of what a single cell membrane and a single set of internal reactions could accomplish. With mitochondria on board, energy became more abundant. The host cells could now support more complex internal structures, more active behaviors, and more ambitious strategies for survival. Energy is the quiet foundation of complexity, and with an energy-rich guest inside, cells gained the freedom to grow beyond their previous limitations. The emergence of mitochondria also improved efficiency. Instead of performing all energy-related reactions themselves, cells could rely on specialized partners that excelled at the task. The workload became shared. Division of labor, a concept that seems almost human in its organization, blossomed at this microscopic scale. The host cell provided resources and protection. The internal guest produced energy with remarkable reliability. This cooperative system allowed both partners to do more than either could have achieved alone. As energy availability increased, cells began to explore new forms. Some grew larger. Others developed internal compartments to organize their chemistry more effectively. New molecular pathways evolved, supporting greater structural flexibility and more intricate behavior. Cellular life began branching out, experimenting with shapes, structures, and strategies that were far beyond the reach of their simpler ancestors. Complexity had arrived, and with it came a flood of new possibilities for adaptation and growth. These early steps toward complexity set the stage for organisms capable of movement, sensing, and communication. A single cell with a mitochondrial partner could fuel faster reactions, respond more quickly to changes in its environment, and support more demanding internal processes. These capabilities laid the groundwork for multicellularity, for growth, for the emergence of tissues and organs, and for the long journey toward the incredible diversity of life you see today. In the quiet cooperation of two tiny cells, the blueprint for future complexity was drawn. It is important to recognize how extraordinary this moment was. It was not a grand event, not a flash of lightning or a sudden revolution. It was a small, quiet collaboration between two cells that found mutual benefit in staying together. That simple act of coexistence transformed the trajectory of life. Evolution frequently works this way. Rather than reshaping the world with dramatic leaps, it often relies on small steps that reveal unexpected advantages. Two cells learning to share space may sound unassuming, but it altered the entire future of biology. The beauty of this partnership lies in its durability. Billions of years later, the descendants of these early guests continue to work within nearly every complex cell. They are not symbionts anymore in the traditional sense. They are part of the cell itself, so deeply integrated that life would collapse without them, yet the imprint of their ancestry remains. Mitochondrial DNA carries a shadow of their original identity, a quiet echo of their bacterial past. This collaboration also highlights a gentle truth about life. Cooperation can be as powerful as competition. While many stories of evolution focus on the struggle for survival, the rise of complex life owes just as much to alliances, partnerships, and shared responsibilities. Sometimes survival is strengthened when boundaries soften and two systems learn to coexist. It is almost poetic that the complexity of all higher life forms rests on a partnership that began with one cell giving another a place to stay. If you picture this moment carefully, you may feel a sense of wonder at how modest it appears. A host cell absorbs a smaller cell. The smaller cell survives. The two remain together. And from this simple arrangement comes every branching tree, every leaf, every feather, every organ, and every mind capable of thinking about the story itself, complexity did not rush in with a flourish. It grew in the quiet space created by cooperation. This shift from solitary existence to shared energy use marks one of the greatest transitions in the history of biology. Life gained new tools, new forms, and new levels of organization. Processes that were once too costly became possible. Structures that were once too demanding became sustainable. Complexity, once a distant dream in the world of single cells, became a natural and achievable path. As you reflect on this moment, it becomes clear that life often grows by embracing connection. One cell welcomed another, and the world was changed forever. From that tiny gesture of coexistence, complexity unfolded like a long, patient story, written slowly across the surface of the earth. And all of it traces back to a partnership so simple that it could have been missed entirely had we not discovered its profound consequences. Life, once it had gained the ability to grow more complex, needed something it had never required before: a way to remember. Chemical loops and early cells could persist for a time, but without a stable record of what worked, nothing could build upon past success. The world needed a quiet place to store instructions, a gentle archive where the patterns of living chemistry could be written down, protected, and passed forward. That archive arrived in the form of DNA, a molecule so skilled at remembering that every living thing on Earth carries its imprint. It became life's library, its memory system, its long and winding story written in a language older than any creature. DNA often appears in illustrations as a graceful twisting ladder, but its true beauty lies in its ability to hold information with astonishing fidelity. Imagine shelves stretching on for unthinkable distances, filled with volumes that describe how to build a cell, how to repair damage, how to use energy, and how to pass on those instructions to the next generation. This library does not use ink or paper. It stores meaning in the order of tiny molecular units arranged along its length, each acting like a letter in a word. Alone, a single letter says little. Together, in long strings and patterns, they form instructions that cells can read and interpret with exquisite precision. The sequences along DNA are far more than simple lists. They act as descriptions of how to craft proteins, the remarkable molecular tools that carry out nearly every task within a cell. Instead of symbols, imagine these sequences as sentences written in a language with only 4 letters, each one contributing to the meaning of the phrase. A certain pattern of letters might instruct, build a protein that holds structures together, while another might roughly translate as, prepare a molecule that will help break down nutrients. Each sentence creates a shape. Each shape becomes a function. Proteins arise from these written instructions like sculptures emerging from a set of careful guidelines. Inside the cell, this reading process happens quietly and efficiently. First, a small segment of DNA is copied into a temporary message, almost like taking a page from the library without disturbing the original book. This temporary copy is then used as a guide to assemble a chain of building blocks into a precise shape. When the shape folds into its final form, it becomes a working protein. Every heartbeat, every thought, every breath is supported by countless proteins performing their tasks, all following instructions written long before you were born. It is a system that balances durability with adaptability, ensuring that life continues smoothly while always allowing for gentle improvisations. Improvisation appears in the form of mutation, a word that can sound alarming but is essential to the creativity of evolution. Mutations are small changes in the sequence of letters within DNA. A single letter may be swapped for another. A segment might be duplicated. A small section may disappear or reappear in a different place. Most of these changes do not alter anything significant. Some have noticeable effects, though many of those simply create subtle differences in shape or function. In rare moments, a mutation introduces a remarkable improvement or an entirely new possibility. Rather than thinking of mutations as errors, it is more accurate to think of them as variations in a long improvisational performance. A musician might play a familiar melody, but allow one note to rise or fall in a new way, creating a surprising and delightful shift. Life behaves similarly. Through mutation, it explores new versions of its own patterns. Some variations fade quickly. Others become treasured additions to the library, passed along because they offer strength, resilience, or new abilities. In this gentle balance between stability and flexibility, life discovered the key to endless diversity. The stability of DNA ensures that instructions remain reliable across generations. Without stability, organisms would change too quickly to maintain any coherent identity. A cell could not build itself if its instructions fluctuated wildly from moment to moment. Yet without the occasional mutation, life would stagnate. Nothing new could emerge. No fresh adaptations would appear. The world would remain locked in whatever forms first took shape. DNA offers a perfect combination of reliability and creativity, holding fast to what works while leaving space for experimentation. This dual nature allowed life to expand into countless environments. In warm seas, freezing tundras, deep caves, and bright forests, DNA recorded the lessons each lineage learned. A successful adaptation, once introduced, could be preserved for millions of years. For example, the ability to bind oxygen became an enduring feature of many creatures. The patterns that shape the skeletons of ancient animals can still be seen in distant descendants. Even the instinctive responses of some organisms trace back to ancient molecular memories embedded in DNA. Life never forgets its ancestors' lessons. It carries them quietly, encoded in sequences that have travelled through time with astonishing resilience. Every cell in your body holds a record of this long history, written in a language shared by fungi, plants, animals, and microbes alike. You are, at the most fundamental level, a continuation of patterns that began forming in the earliest seas. The DNA you carry is not just a set of instructions for building you. It is a time capsule containing the successes, struggles, and innovations of life stretching back billions of years. Sometimes the depth of that memory is almost overwhelming to imagine. A molecule inside your cells today may resemble one used by ancient organisms that lived long before the first complex life ever appeared. The enzymes that help break down your food echo those that existed in single-celled creatures swimming in the oceans when the continents were still young. Even the proteins that help copy your DNA share ancestry with those that existed in microbial communities in the far distant past. Life remembers everything that proved useful, passing those memories forward quietly and steadily. This continuity creates a sense of connection across time. Every organism alive today shares variations of the same fundamental molecular blueprint. Plants, animals, and microbes write their stories in the same alphabet, differing only in the order of their letters and the chapters they have added or revised. It is a reminder that the vast diversity of life does not arise from entirely different sets of tools, but from creative variations of the same underlying language. Thinking of DNA as a library helps highlight its most poignant aspect. It grows with each generation. New pages are added. Old pages are occasionally edited. Entire chapters may be rearranged. Yet the library never closes. It remains active, expanding continuously as life explores new niches and adapts to new challenges. In the grand timeline of Earth, DNA has been the one steady historian, preserving what works and granting permission for endless experimentation. As you rest into the quiet rhythm of this thought, it becomes clear how extraordinary this system truly is. Life built a structure capable of preserving delicate information across unimaginable stretches of time. It created a memory system that allows species to learn not through conscious reflection, but through gradual, inherited change. Every adaptation, every new function, every flourish of diversity is part of this long conversation between stability and improvisation. DNA is life's memory, but it is also life's imagination. It is the quiet library that holds stories from the dawn of biology, and at the same time, it is the author of new possibilities. With each gentle mutation, with each preserved instruction, life rewrites its ongoing tale, ensuring that the next generation carries both the wisdom of the past and the potential for something entirely new. Proteins are some of the most remarkable structures life has ever created, yet they begin with an astonishing simplicity. Each one is built from small repeating units linked together in a chain, much like beads threaded onto a string. The magic begins when that chain folds. It twists and loops and settles into a shape so specific that even a tiny change in its contour can completely alter its purpose. A protein's function is written not only in the order of its units, but in the graceful way it settles into 3 dimensions. Shape is everything. A curl here, a pocket there, a gentle bend along one edge. Together they create a tool perfectly suited for its task. The cell is full of these tools. Some act like tiny levers, some like clamps, some like conveyor belts, and some behave almost like gates that open only under certain conditions. This variety is possible because the shapes proteins can fold into are nearly endless. The chain that forms them is flexible, able to twist itself into forms that fit the cell's needs with elegant precision. Every little turn allows the protein to bind to certain molecules but not others, to stabilize reactions or let them proceed, or to link up with other proteins to create larger structures. It is as if the cell maintains a vast toolbox, with each tool designed for a specific task, yet all crafted from the same basic set of ingredients. Enzymes are among the most impressive of these protein tools. They act as gentle molecular helpers, encouraging reactions to happen more quickly and more efficiently than they ever would on their own. Without enzymes, the chemistry of life would run at a pace far too slow to sustain any living thing. Many reactions that are essential for survival would take longer than the age of the universe to occur naturally. Enzymes step in with quiet helpfulness, guiding molecules into the right positions so reactions can unfold in a fraction of a moment. They do not force anything. They simply provide the perfect environment for chemistry to proceed smoothly, the way a calm voice can encourage someone to take a step they were uncertain about. Picture an enzyme as a small, intricately shaped pocket. A molecule drifts by, fits into that pocket like a key slipping into a lock, and suddenly the reaction it needs to undergo becomes easy, almost effortless. The enzyme holds the molecule just right, offering support, alignment, and stability. When the reaction finishes, the product drifts away, and the enzyme is ready to help another molecule. This quiet, repeated action keeps life moving forward. Enzymes carry out countless tasks at any given moment in your cells, working tirelessly without ever wearing out in the dramatic sense. They are among the most patient helpers in biology. But enzymes are only one category of proteins. There are others that focus on transport, shuttling molecules across the cell like tiny ferries. Some sit within the cell membrane, forming small gateways that let water, ions, and nutrients pass at the right time and in the correct amounts. These transport proteins act with delicate selectivity, ensuring that only the right molecules move in or out. They help maintain balance, which is crucial for any active system. A cell could not function if it let everything drift freely. It needs these careful gatekeepers to shape its internal environment. Structural proteins are the quiet architects of the cell. They form scaffolding inside the cytoplasm, giving the cell its shape and providing pathways along which other molecules can travel. Without them, a cell would collapse into a featureless blob with no organization. Structural proteins form fibers and networks that support the cell's architecture. In some organisms, they even help with movement, extending and contracting in coordinated ways that let the cell crawl or swim. Though you never notice their work directly, structural proteins are responsible for the silent stability that keeps everything in place. Signaling proteins, on the other hand, are all about communication. They allow cells to sense their surroundings and respond appropriately. When the world outside changes, signaling proteins notice the shift and relay the information inward. They might change shape when they encounter a specific molecule, triggering a cascade of events inside the cell. This cascade can alter gene expression, adjust metabolism, or prepare the cell to divide. Through these subtle messages, cells maintain awareness of their environment and make decisions that help them thrive. It is an intricate system of communication built entirely from the folding and unfolding of proteins. Together, these categories of proteins allow cells to act with surprising sophistication. They let cells build structures, transport nutrients, gather information, produce energy, and maintain their internal order. Proteins turn the cell from a simple bag of chemicals into a dynamic, responsive system that feels almost alive even before you consider the higher levels of biological organization. Every breath you take, every movement of your muscles, every moment your thoughts drift slowly through your mind, all of it depends on proteins performing their tasks with unwavering dedication. The variety of proteins that exist is astonishing. Even a simple cell may contain thousands of different types, each with its own shape and purpose. Many proteins work in teams, forming complexes that operate like tiny machines. These machines can spin, pull, rotate, or shift other molecules, all guided by the subtle interplay of shapes. The complexity of these assemblies is breathtaking when you consider that they emerge from the folding of simple chains. It is a reminder of how much can arise from basic foundations when nature is given time to experiment. Despite this complexity, all proteins share a common feature. They must fold correctly to function. If a protein misfolds even slightly, it can lose its ability to help the cell. This is why cells have additional systems whose sole purpose is to support proper protein folding, gently guiding new proteins into their correct shapes and rescuing those that are struggling. It is almost heartwarming to imagine these molecular chaperones helping their fellow proteins settle comfortably into their intended forms. Life takes care of its tools because without them, the entire system would unravel. Proteins also act as the interface between the cell and the outside world. When something changes in the environment, proteins sense it. When nutrients become available, proteins capture and transport them. When danger approaches, proteins help the cell mount a response. In essence, proteins are what allow the cell not just to exist, but to act. They are its limbs, its senses, its voice, and its guardians. Without proteins, DNA's instructions would sit unused, like books that are never opened, and energy would remain unwoven into the fabric of life. One of the most intriguing aspects of proteins is how they enable both stability and adaptability. Their shapes can remain consistent across countless generations, preserving functions that have proven valuable. Yet they can also evolve new shapes through small changes in the DNA that encodes them. This means proteins carry both the memory of past success and the possibility of future innovation. They reflect life's continuous balancing act between keeping what works and exploring what else might be possible. If you look closely at the history of life, proteins appear as the quiet artisans behind every major development. They helped the earlier cells manage their chemistry. They made complex cells possible by supporting internal structures and communication. They enable movement, perception, and thought in higher organisms. In a profound way, proteins are the hands of life, shaping the physical world within every living thing. As you imagine the inside of a cell full of delicate shapes drifting, folding, and working together in perfect synchrony, it becomes clear how extraordinary these molecules truly are. They're not rigid or mechanical. They are fluid, adaptable, and endlessly inventive. Proteins are life's workers, its builders, its guardians, and its storytellers, carrying out the instructions written in DNA and translating them into the rich and vibrant forms that populate the Earth. Every living thing, from the smallest drifting microbe to the tallest tree stretching toward the sky, must find a way to gather energy. Without energy, the molecules inside cells would fall still, reactions would cease, and the delicate order that defines life would dissolve back into the background of the universe. Energy is not just helpful to living systems, it is their lifeblood, the gentle current that keeps every process flowing. Life is, at its core, a constant negotiation with the rules of physics, finding creative ways to hold on to order in a world that naturally drifts toward disorder. Organisms harvest energy in many ways, but every method eventually funnels into the same need, powering the countless tasks inside the cell. Whether a creature gathers energy from sunlight, from nutrients in food, or from the chemicals drifting through deep-sea vents, the goal remains the same. Molecules must be moved, proteins must be built, membranes must be maintained, and information in DNA must be read and copied. All of this requires a steady stream of energy, as reliable as the heartbeat of the world itself. Inside the cell, the most common form of readily usable energy is a small molecule, often described with complicated chemical notation. But instead of thinking about it that way, imagine it as a tiny spring coiled up and ready to release a burst of power. This molecule is ATP, a short name for a structure that stores energy in a way the cell can access easily. When a protein needs to fold, when a pump in the membrane needs to move an ion, or when a strand of DNA needs to be copied, the cell hands over one of these charged springs, letting it uncoil and release the energy needed to complete the task. Once the spring is spent, the cell calmly coils it back up again using energy gathered from food or sunlight, ready for the next job. Gathering that energy is a delicate art, and living things have invented two primary strategies to do it: respiration and photosynthesis. In respiration, organisms take in molecules from their environment, often sugars, fats, or other nutrients, and break them down in a controlled stepwise manner. Each step releases small bursts of energy that the cell captures and uses to recharge its ATP springs. Respiration is not a chaotic burn. It is a carefully guided process that extracts energy slowly and efficiently. ensuring that the cell can continue its work without wasting resources. Photosynthesis, on the other hand, is the elegant system plants, algae, and certain microbes use to gather energy from sunlight. It begins with pigments that absorb light, catching photons the way a sail catches the wind. That captured light energy is then channeled into a series of reactions that split molecules of water, release oxygen, and build energy-rich molecules that can be stored for later use. The brilliance of photosynthesis lies in its ability to convert sunlight, something intangible and fleeting, into solid, stable forms of energy. It is one of nature's most graceful achievements, turning light into life with quiet consistency. Within the cell, specialized structures help manage this flow of energy. Mitochondria, familiar to many as the cell's power stations, take the products of respiration and refine them into a steady supply of energy-rich ATP. They perform this task with astonishing efficiency, churning out charge springs at a pace that keeps even the most demanding cells running. A single cell may contain hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria, each one humming away quietly, much like tiny lanterns illuminating the pathways of internal chemistry. Chloroplasts perform a similar role in photosynthetic organisms. These structures contain the pigments that capture sunlight and the machinery that uses that light to build energy-rich molecules. Chloroplasts are like small solar workshops, converting the sun's radiance into the material fuel that plants need to grow, repair, and flourish. Together, mitochondria and chloroplasts create a harmonious energy partnership. One captures energy from the environment, and the other prepares it for immediate use. It is striking how both of these power stations have their own small loops of genetic material, a reminder of their ancient origins as free-living bacteria. Long ago, cells welcomed these energy specialists inside, and over time they became essential partners. Even now they work tirelessly, supporting the needs of their host cells with quiet dedication. They are living proof that cooperation can transform the entire trajectory of life, creating new possibilities from simple acts of sharing. Energy flow is not just about powering reactions, it is also about maintaining order. According to the natural tendencies of the universe, every system gradually drifts toward increasing disorder. Left alone, molecules mix randomly, structures fall apart, and patterns dissolve. Life pushes back against this tendency every second. Cells expend energy to repair themselves, rebuild their components, and maintain the careful arrangement of molecules that define their identity. It is a constant balancing act, one that requires energy at every turn. When energy becomes scarce, order collapses, and the cell's delicate structure begins to unravel. This is why a steady stream of energy is so vital. Without it, proteins cannot fold correctly. Membranes lose their shape, signals become muddled. Information in DNA cannot be reliably copied. Every function depends on the ability to harness and use energy with precision. It is what allows a cell to remain distinct from the chaos around it, to resist the pull of disorder that exists everywhere in the universe. Organisms have become astonishingly inventive in their approaches to energy. Some bacteria thrive on chemicals found in volcanic vents, drawing strength from minerals that would seem inhospitable to most other life. Others capture sunlight in deep oceans using bioluminescent partners. Some fungi break down the toughest materials in forests, recycling energy locked in wood and returning it to the ecosystem. Life, no matter where it appears, always finds a method to gather energy in the environment that surrounds it, adapting its strategies to the landscape it inhabits. Energy use is also what allows organisms to grow, repair themselves, and interact with their surroundings. a tree lifting its branches toward the sun, a bird maintaining body heat during a cold night, and a single-celled organism swimming through water all rely on energy to power their movements and maintain their functions. Without the ability to gather and use energy effectively, life would be static, unable to adapt or respond to the world. The beauty of energy flow is that it connects all living things into a continuous chain. Plants capture light and store it as sugars. Animals eat plants or other animals, gaining the energy those organisms have stored. Decomposers break down dead material, returning nutrients to the environment so the cycle can continue. At every step, energy is transformed but never lost. It simply changes form, flowing from one part of the living world to another in a graceful, unending dance. If you think of life as a kind of quiet defiance, energy is the language through which that defiance is expressed. Every heartbeat, every leaf opening, every cell dividing is a declaration that order can persist, that complexity can flourish in a universe that drifts toward simplicity. Life stays balanced on this edge only by constantly renewing its energy supply, drawing from the environment and reshaping that energy into the intricate systems that make existence possible. As you imagine this flow, picture mitochondria glowing faintly within cells, and chloroplasts catching light the way hands catch falling snow. Picture ATP, springs coiling and uncoiling, supporting reactions with gentle bursts of power. Picture energy moving through ecosystems, carried by wind, light, nutrients, and movement. This quiet current sustains everything that grows and breathes. Energy is the thread that ties all of biology together, weaving stability out of the universe's natural inclination toward disorder. Life persists because it has mastered the art of collecting energy, storing it, sharing it, and using it wisely. It is a story told not in dramatic flashes, but in countless tiny reactions happening every moment within every cell. And through this steady work, life maintains its astonishing order, carving structure out of chaos and transforming energy into the quiet miracle of existence. Long before forests covered continents and long before flowers turned sunlight into colour, life faced a simple but enormous challenge: how to gather enough energy to keep growing. Early organisms relied on the chemical richness of their environment, drawing power from the minerals and molecules drifting through ancient oceans. It worked, but it was not a limitless solution. Energy was scattered, inconsistent, and easily depleted. The world needed a new approach, something elegant, reliable, and abundant. The answer had been shining on the planet since its beginning, but it took life a very long time to notice it. Eventually life learned to breathe light. Photosynthesis is one of the most extraordinary inventions in the history of biology. It allows organisms to capture sunlight and convert it into the chemical energy needed to build, repair, and thrive. Rather than waiting for nutrients to drift by or relying solely on chemical reactions in the environment, photosynthetic organisms turn their attention upward, learning to gather energy from the sky. It was as if life opened a window and realized the universe had been offering it a gift all along. The heart of photosynthesis lies in pigments, the molecules that absorb light. The most famous pigment is chlorophyll, the compound that gives plants their characteristic green colour. But chlorophyll does much more than decorate leaves. It acts like a tiny solar collector, catching photons as they stream through the atmosphere. When light strikes chlorophyll, the pigment lifts that energy and sends it into a specialized chain of reactions. This energy does not remain as light. it is transformed into a form that the cell can use to create sugars and other essential molecules. Imagine pigments as little nets scattered across the surfaces of cells. Each net waits patiently for a particle of light. When a photon arrives, the net catches it and hands the energy to a neighbour. This handoff continues in a series of microscopic relay steps, each one guiding the energy deeper into the cell. The process is smooth and efficient, almost like passing a glowing ember along a line of cupped hands. By the end of this journey, the energy is woven into chemical bonds that can be stored, used immediately, or shared with other parts of the cell. This ability to convert sunlight into chemical energy changed everything. It allowed organisms to spread into new environments where nutrients were scarce. It gave life a dependable energy source during long periods when chemical resources were limited. It even created conditions that helped shape the atmosphere itself. When early photosynthetic organisms began releasing oxygen as a byproduct of their work, they set in motion one of the most important transformations the Earth has ever experienced. At first, oxygen was more of a chemical curiosity than a global force. It built up slowly, reacting with iron and other elements in the oceans. For a long time, it did not accumulate in the air at all, but as photosynthesis continued across millions of years, oxygen levels gradually began to rise. It gathered in the atmosphere like a quiet tide, changing the chemical landscape in ways that no organism could have predicted. This rise in oxygen was so profound that geologists call it the Great Oxygenation Event. The arrival of oxygen did not immediately benefit all life. In fact, for many early organisms, oxygen was toxic, a reactive gas that damaged the delicate chemistry inside their cells. Entire lineages were pushed into new environments, or faded from existence as oxygen levels increased. But for others, oxygen opened doors to energy strategies far more efficient than anything that had come before. New forms of metabolism emerged, allowing organisms to break down nutrients with an efficiency that seemed almost generous. With oxygen, cells could generate far more energy from the same amount of food, fueling new levels of activity and growth. This shift in metabolic potential set the stage for the evolution of more complex life. With abundant energy available, cells could afford to build internal compartments, develop new mechanisms of communication, and explore larger and more intricate structures. Complexity grew because energy was no longer the strict limiting factor it had once been. Oxygen, produced by the quiet work of photosynthetic organisms, became the foundation upon which the diversity of complex life was built. It is humbling to realize that every breath you take exists because ancient microbes learned how to use sunlight. The oxygen that fills your lungs is the legacy of countless generations of photosynthetic organisms, stretching back billions of years. These early innovators did not simply survive, they reshaped the planet in ways that made advanced life possible. Their gentle release of oxygen brightened the chemical landscape, clearing a path for the evolution of animals, plants, fungi, and everything else that relies on oxygen-based metabolism. Photosynthesis also influenced the appearance of ecosystems. Once organisms could gather energy directly from sunlight, they began to expand across surfaces exposed to light. They spread into shallow oceans, climbed onto newly formed landmasses, and eventually gave rise to the lush plant life that carpets the earth today. The green of forests, the swaying of seaweed, and the delicate spread of moss across rocks all trace their origins to that ancient discovery that light itself could be food. If you look at the natural world today, the quiet work of photosynthesis is everywhere. Trees lift their leaves to the sun, harvesting light with practiced ease. Grasses catch the morning glow and turn it into nourishment. Even algae in distant oceans create vast swirls of microscopic green that help feed entire ecosystems. All of this activity rests on pigments that spent millions of years perfecting their craft, catching sunlight and weaving it into the chemical fabric of life. At its core, photosynthesis is a lesson in how life learns to grow. It teaches us that energy can be gathered in unexpected ways, and that solutions to life's challenges often come from the simplest interactions between molecules and light. It reminds us that evolution is not always driven by competition or conflict. Sometimes it advances by noticing a resource that has always been present and finding a way to use it gracefully. There is something deeply poetic about the idea that life began in darkness, dependent on chemical reactions hidden in ancient seas, and then slowly learned to reach toward the light. Sunlight became a partner, this steady source of energy that allowed life to flourish in colours, textures, and forms that would have been impossible otherwise. The fact that many organisms appear green is a clue to this long relationship, a reminder that pigments inside their cells are still catching sunlight just as they did billions of years ago. As you imagine early Earth, picture tiny photosynthetic cells floating near the surface of the ocean, turning sunlight into the first oxygen molecules. Picture the slow accumulation of oxygen in the air, the transformation of the planet's chemistry, and the rise of organisms that relied on this new atmosphere. Picture forests stretching across land, their leaves capturing light with quiet persistence, each one participating in a process older than any mountain or river. Light taught life to grow, not by force, but by offering a gentle, abundant source of energy. Life accepted that offer, wove it into its biology, and reshaped the world in the process. Through photosynthesis, the Earth became a brighter, more dynamic place, filled with organisms that could gather energy from the sky and breathe the air transformed by their ancestors. And every time you see a leaf glowing in sunlight, or an ocean shimmering with algae, you're witnessing the ancient conversation between light and life, a dialogue that continues to this day. Multicellularity began not with a sudden leap into complexity, but with a quiet realization repeated by countless tiny organisms over millions of years. Sometimes it helps to have company. For a long stretch of Earth's history, life existed entirely as single cells drifting through oceans, clinging to rocks, or floating near the surface where sunlight reached. Each cell managed its own tasks, made its own decisions, and lived as a solitary unit. But as environments shifted and opportunity appeared, some cells discovered that cooperation offered advantages no lone cell could achieve. It was the beginning of a biological experiment that would eventually give rise to creatures of remarkable size, structure, and intricacy. The earliest forms of teamwork were simple. Some cells stuck together after dividing, not because they intended to, but because their outer surfaces had molecules that made separation a little less likely. Imagine two siblings holding hands instinctively because the world feels easier to navigate together. These tiny clusters drifted differently from solitary cells. They might have been harder for predators to engulf, or better able to catch nutrients as they move through the water. Even a small increase in survival was enough to make sticking together a favourable strategy. Once cells began forming clusters, they needed ways to hold themselves together reliably. This is where cellular adhesion emerged. Adhesion molecules acted like gentle glues on the surfaces of cells, allowing them to bond selectively with neighbours. These bonds were not rigid. They were flexible enough to allow movement and shifting, yet strong enough to keep the group intact. The ability to adhere gave these early clusters stability and opened the door for more complex arrangements. Instead of drifting apart at the slightest disturbance, groups of cells could maintain structure as they floated through their environments. But sticking together was only the first step. For multicellularity to flourish, cells needed to communicate. Single cells already had internal signaling systems responding to changes in their environment by adjusting their behavior. In a group, however, cells had to share information with one another. If one cell sensed nutrients, others needed to know. If danger approached, the entire group benefited from responding together. This communication often involved small molecules drifting between cells or proteins on cell surfaces acting like messengers. Slowly, cells became better at coordinating their actions, behaving less like a crowd of individuals and more like a unified whole. With adhesion and communication in place, something remarkable began to unfold. Some cells within the group started to specialize. They took on specific roles that benefited the entire community. One cell might focus on gathering nutrients, while another prioritized reproduction. Some cells became better at sensing the environment, while others excelled at holding the cluster's structure together. This division of labor allowed the group to perform tasks no single cell could accomplish alone. Differentiation had begun. Differentiation is one of life's most ingenious innovations. By allowing cells to adopt specialized roles, organisms gained the ability to develop tissues, structures, and functions that increased their chances of survival. Over time, these specialized cells formed layers, patterns, and arrangements that grew more elaborate. Some became muscle cells capable of contracting. Others became nerve cells capable of transmitting signals over long distances. Others formed protective surfaces or secreted substances that strengthened the group. Diversity within the cluster allowed for greater complexity, creating a system where every cell was important, but not identical. As multicellular organisms grew in size, their shapes evolved as well. Larger bodies offered protection from predators, improved mobility, and allowed organisms to explore new environments. Shapes became streamlined, branching, flattened, or elongated depending on what served the organism's needs. A thin, flat structure captured sunlight more effectively, while a thick, cylindrical form offered strength and stability. The emergence of shape opened the door to structures like leaves, stems, fins, and shells, each one reflecting a long history of adaptation. At a certain point, these cooperating clusters became so integrated that they were no longer simply groups of cells living together. They had become organisms in their own right. Their cells shared a common purpose and communicated in sophisticated ways. The individual identities of the cells faded into the background as the identity of the organism emerged. From the outside, it appeared as a single being, but deep within it was still a committee of cells, all working together in astonishing harmony. This is where a bit of humour finds its place, because multicellular life is essentially a grand meeting of tiny individuals agreeing to cooperate. Every complex organism, no matter how elegant, is fundamentally a large group of cells negotiating the terms of shared existence. When things go smoothly, the organism grows, moves, and thrives. When communication falters or cells forget their roles, problems arise. In this sense, the entire history of multicellularity is the story of committees learning to get along, a process familiar to anyone who has ever watched a group try to decide on a restaurant or organize a holiday. What made cooperation so successful was that it allowed life to tackle new challenges. Large organisms could move faster, grow taller, and explore environments closed to single-celled creatures. They could regulate their internal conditions, maintain stable temperatures, and store nutrients. Some developed protective layers to shield their delicate internal cells. Others evolved support structures like bones or fibers, enabling them to grow upward or outward without collapsing. Complexity is not just about more parts, it is about parts working together toward shared goals. Even at the smallest scale, multicellularity transformed the environment. Large clusters of cells altered the flow of nutrients, created new niches for other organisms, and shifted the chemical composition of their surroundings. Early multicellular forms may have resembled simple mats or filaments, spreading across surfaces and creating habitats for countless microscopic species. Over time, these forms branched into the diverse body plans that shaped the evolution of plants, fungi, and animals. Communication grew more sophisticated as multicellular organisms expanded. Cells used electrical signals, chemical messages, and physical interactions to coordinate their actions. Entire networks of communication evolved, forming the foundations of nervous systems, hormonal systems, and immune responses. What began as simple signaling between neighboring cells eventually gave rise to the complex interplay that allows organisms to sense, think, heal, and adapt. The beauty of multicellularity lies in its gentle progression. It did not arrive suddenly as a fully formed system. It began with cells choosing, or perhaps stumbling into, cooperation, discovering that life becomes more efficient when tasks are shared. The more cells worked together, the more possibilities emerged. With each new layer of organization, organisms gained abilities that changed the face of the earth. Swimming, crawling, breathing, circulating nutrients, perceiving the world. All of these became achievable only after life embraced the power of teamwork. Reflecting on this transition reminds us that complexity is not always the result of competition. Sometimes the most transformative changes arise from collaboration, from recognizing that many small parts can create something far greater when they join forces. Every organism alive today, from the simplest sponges to the most intricate mammals, carries the legacy of those early partnerships. Each body is a chorus of cells speaking in unison, performing the quiet miracle of cooperation moment after moment. As you imagine those first clusters drifting through ancient seas, picture how they slowly learn to share tasks, communicate needs, and rely on one another. Picture the emergence of tissues, the first movements of coordinated structures, the early shapes that hinted at the creatures to come. The rise of multicellularity was not a loud event, but a gradual gathering of voices. And from that gathering, life gained the ability to grow in forms as diverse as forests, coral reefs, and every creature that has ever wandered across the earth. As multicellular life grew more ambitious, a new kind of organization began to unfold. Cells had already learned to cooperate, to stick together and communicate with one another, but cooperation alone was not enough to create the stunning variety of shapes and functions seen in the living world today. Something deeper was needed, a hierarchy of structure, a way for cells to take on roles within a larger architectural plan. From this need arose one of biology's most elegant ideas, the formation of tissues, organs, and eventually entire body plans. The journey from a single cell to a complete organism begins with simple steps. When groups of similar cells gather and specialize together, they form tissues. These tissues behave like coordinated teams. Some specialize in contraction, becoming muscle tissue. Others become excellent at carrying signals, becoming nervous tissue. Some create protective barriers, forming layers like skin, or the lining of internal surfaces. Even though each tissue is made from the same basic building blocks, cells, the differences in their structure give rise to entirely new abilities. From tissues, complexity grows further. When multiple tissues work together toward a shared purpose, they form organs. An organ is like a beautifully crafted miniature community. A heart contains muscle tissue that contracts rhythmically, connective tissue that holds everything in place, and nervous tissue that ensures the timing is precise. A leaf contains tissues that capture sunlight, transport water, and allow gases to move in and out. Each organ is a masterpiece of collaboration, where every tissue contributes to a larger goal. These organs then fit into organ systems, the broad networks that make up the structure of a living body. Systems like the nervous system, the digestive system, or the respiratory system each rely on a suite of organs working together in harmony. A body plan emerges from the arrangement of these systems, determining how the organism moves, senses, grows, and interacts with the world. When you think about it, every living creature is the result of many layers of organization stacked together like chapters in a well-arranged book, each building upon the last. What makes this truly remarkable is how quietly logical the whole structure is. The body plan is not designed in a rigid top-down way. Instead, it arises naturally from simple rules followed during development. When an embryo begins as a single cell and divides, those early divisions create clusters. These clusters begin to sense subtle differences in their environment, such as gradients of signaling molecules. Imagine faint mist drifting through the early embryo, with certain areas receiving a little more of one signal and a little less of another. Cells respond to these gradients, adopting specific identities based on where they find themselves. This is the quiet logic of developmental biology. Cells do not require a blueprint drawn in fine detail. They follow simple rules: sense your surroundings, respond to signals, communicate with your neighbors, and act accordingly. Through these small steps, patterns emerge. A cluster might become part of a limb, another part of a spine, another part of the nervous system. Despite the vast complexity of the adult organism, the foundations of its architecture arise from interactions so subtle they could almost be mistaken for whispers. One of the most beautiful patterns in body architecture is symmetry. Many organisms display bilateral symmetry, meaning their left and right sides mirror one another. Others exhibit radial symmetry, like the spokes of a wheel. This symmetry is not merely an aesthetic choice. It arises naturally from how signals spread through developing tissues. When cells receive evenly distributed cues from their center outward, a symmetric structure forms almost automatically. Symmetry also brings practical advantages. It simplifies movement, balances forces, and creates a consistent framework for building complex forms. Another important architectural principle is segmentation. Segments are repeated units arranged in series, like the links of a chain or the vertebrae of a spine. Segmentation allows organisms to grow in length or complexity by repeating a successful pattern. Early in development, certain genes create periodic stripes of activity along the body, guiding cells into repeating structures. Later, these structures can specialize. It is why the segments that make up a caterpillar's body can later transform into dramatically different features: legs, wings, or antennae. Segmentation offers both stability and flexibility, a perfect combination for evolving new forms. Gradients also play a major role in shaping body plans. A gradient is simply a smooth change in concentration from one area to another. Cells interpret these gradients like travelers interpreting shifts in the landscape. A slight increase in one molecule might signal a cell to become part of the head, while a lower concentration pushes it toward forming a tail. Other gradients help establish the back, belly, or limbs. These flowing patterns of information form a map that cells follow, without ever needing to know the full picture. Each cell responds locally, and together they build something astonishingly global. What makes all of this so elegant is how complexity arises from simplicity. The rules that guide development are not complicated. Cells respond to signals, they communicate with neighbours, they divide, specialize, and rearrange themselves. Yet these interactions give rise to structures as intricate as the branching of a lung, the spiraling of a shell, or the pattern of veins in a leaf. Simple instructions repeated many times create the rich diversity of forms in nature. It is the biological equivalent of a choir singing harmonies that no single voice could produce alone. Tissues and organs also illustrate the deep cooperation required for multicellular life to thrive. No tissue succeeds in isolation. Muscle cannot work without nerves. Nerves cannot function without blood supply. Blood vessels require connective tissues to maintain their shape. This interdependence gives organisms resilience. If one area falters, others can support it. Every system contributes to the well-being of the whole, and this connectedness gives multicellular life its extraordinary staying power. It is tempting to think of the body plan as something fixed, but throughout evolution it has been flexible. Early organisms experimented with countless arrangements. Some forms faded away, while others gave rise to lineages still present today. The incredible diversity of life on Earth is a testament to how many ways simple developmental rules can be combined. A slight shift in a gradient, a small change in how cells adhere, or a new timing in communication during development can produce entirely new structures. Over deep time, these small adjustments add up, generating the endless parade of forms that fill our oceans, forests, and skies. When you look at an organism, a tree with spreading branches, a fish with a streamlined body, or a bird with graceful wings, you are witnessing the outcome of countless interactions between cells following simple rules during early development. The elegance of these structures is not imposed from outside, but emerges from the system itself. Biology often works this way, letting complexity arise through self-organization rather than strict instruction. As you imagine this unfolding, picture an embryo as a quiet landscape filled with drifting signals, gradients, and clusters of cells responding to their environment. Picture tissues forming smooth layers, organs beginning to shape themselves, and the early outlines of a body plan appearing softly like lines forming on misted glass. All of it guided by rules so gentle and consistent that every organism, no matter how different, shares echoes of the same underlying logic. The power of tissues, organs, and body plans lies in their unity. They reveal how life builds complexity not through chaos, but through structure and cooperation. They show how simple rules carried out faithfully can give rise to creatures of breathtaking intricacy. And they remind us that inside every living organism, no matter how grand or humble, is a quiet community of cells working together with quiet precision, building a body that can move, sense, grow, and exist in the world. Long before animals swam through oceans or walked across land, life had already begun inventing ways to sense the world. Even the simplest cells needed to detect changes in their surroundings. A shift in temperature, a hint of a nutrient, or the presence of a harmful chemical could influence how a cell behaved. These early forms of signaling were not complicated. They involved molecules drifting toward receptors on cell surfaces, setting off reactions inside. Yet in these quiet exchanges lay the seeds of something far more powerful. Over deep time, these subtle communications would evolve into the first nerve cells, and eventually into nervous systems capable of thought, memory, and awareness. The earliest ancestors of nerve cells likely began as cells that were a little better than others at noticing their environment. Perhaps they had extra receptors or responded more swiftly to certain cues. These cells gained advantages by reacting quickly, helping their organisms move toward food or away from danger. Gradually, evolution favoured cells that could send signals as well as receive them, instead of relying only on chemical diffusion, which is slow and unpredictable. These early signalling cells developed long extensions that allowed messages to travel more directly. These extensions were the first whispers of what would become the nervous system. As organisms grew larger and more complex, simple signalling was not enough. A message that took too long to spread through a body might mean the difference between catching food and becoming food. Faster communication became essential. Cells specialized further, refining their ability to transmit signals quickly and reliably. They developed structures that allowed electrical impulses to travel along their lengths, like tiny lightning bolts carrying information from one part of the body to another. These were the earliest nerve cells, slender but efficient, allowing organisms to coordinate movement in ways that had never been possible before. Once nerve cells existed, networks naturally followed. A single nerve cell could transmit a message, but a group of interconnected cells could create a pathway, allowing signals to flow in more complex patterns. These networks acted like communication webs within the body. They connected tissues, coordinated responses, and helped organisms react more intelligently to their surroundings. A simple touch could trigger a ripple of activity across the network, guiding movement or triggering defensive responses. Over time, clusters of nerve cells formed ganglia, small hubs that handled local processing. Instead of sending every signal across the entire organism, these hubs allowed for quicker, more efficient decision-making. Ganglia helped organisms navigate their environment, respond to predators, or coordinate motion in their limbs. These small centers of activity were early prototypes of what, much later, would become brains. They were not thinking in any conscious sense, but they were solving problems on a level far more sophisticated than anything life had achieved before. As organisms continued to evolve, the networks grew denser. More nerves meant more information could be processed. More ganglia meant more coordinated behaviors became possible. Eventually, in some lineages, these clusters merged into larger central structures. These early brains were nothing like the intricate organs found in animals today. They were small knots of nerve tissue capable of integrating signals and coordinating responses. Yet in these simple forms lay the foundation for memory, perception, and choice. The rise of brains revolutionized how organisms interacted with the world. Instead of reacting purely through reflexes, they could begin to anticipate and adapt. A brain allowed an organism to remember where food had been found, to learn which environments were dangerous, or to refine its movements over time. It allowed creatures to navigate their surroundings with a new kind of intelligence, one that blended instinct with experience. This shift marked a turning point in the history of life, enabling behaviors more complex and flexible than ever before. Movement took on new possibilities. Nerve networks coordinated muscles with greater precision, allowing smoother swimming, crawling, and eventually walking. Sensory cells evolved to detect light, sound, pressure, and chemicals, feeding a constant stream of information into the nervous system. With better input came better output. Organisms could now respond to the world with agility and purpose. exploring new areas, escaping threats, and seeking opportunities with heightened awareness. Sensing and moving became intertwined. Eyes developed from light-sensitive patches, ears from pressure-sensing cells, and taste and smell from chemical receptors. Each of these systems fed information into the nervous system, enriching the messages travelling along its pathways. The world grew more vivid to the organisms that inhabited it. They could detect patterns, follow trails, and recognize signals from others of their kind. Life became more dynamic, shaped not only by the environment, but by how organisms perceived that environment. Choice emerged from this growing complexity. A single-celled organism cannot truly choose. It simply reacts. But a creature with a nervous system can weigh options, even in simple ways. It can move toward one stimulus and away from another. It can linger in a beneficial environment or avoid a harmful one. Over countless generations, these small decisions influence survival and reproduction, driving evolution in new directions. Awareness, even in its most basic form, became a powerful tool. As nervous systems expanded, some lineages embraced ever more elaborate forms of organization. Invertebrates developed intricate networks that allowed them to navigate reefs, build shelters, or coordinate movements in huge shoals. Vertebrates developed spinal cords that served as highways for signals, and brains that became increasingly layered and specialized. Each new step added nuance to awareness, enabling behaviors that range from migration to communication to the formation of social structures. Yet despite this enormous variety, the underlying principle remained the same. The nervous system is the body's way of gathering information, processing it, and acting on it. It turns sensation into motion, experience into memory, and patterns into choices. Without it, complex life would be little more than drifting machinery, responding only to immediate chemical cues. With it, life gains the ability to explore, interact, and even reflect. It is fascinating to consider that all of this began with simple chemical exchanges between cells. A small improvement in signaling led to connections. Connections led to networks. Networks led to hubs. Hubs led to brains. And brains, in their many forms, allowed awareness to spread through the tree of life. Even organisms without brains demonstrate behaviors shaped by nervous systems or nerve-like structures. Jellyfish pulse gracefully through water using signals coordinated by nerve nets. Starfish move with purposeful elegance guided by distributed systems along their arms. Awareness does not require complexity, it only requires connection. Awareness itself comes in countless shades. A simple worm senses vibrations in the soil. A bird recognizes patterns in the sky. A dolphin interprets echoes. A human contemplates the meaning of consciousness. Each of these experiences is built from the same fundamental machinery, refined over millions of years, but rooted in the earliest nerve cells that learned to transmit messages more efficiently than chemical diffusion alone could manage. As you let your thoughts drift, imagine awareness spreading through early oceans like a soft glow. At first, it was only a faint ability to sense and respond. Then it brightened, gaining colour and depth as nervous systems grew more sophisticated. Eventually, awareness became one of life's defining features, allowing organisms not only to survive but to experience the world in ways that feel rich, textured, and meaningful. The nervous system is the quiet thread that connects sensation to action, perception to decision, and life to its ever-changing environment. It is life learning to notice, to react, to remember, and ultimately to understand. And in its long evolution, From the simpler signals to the most complex thoughts, it reveals how awareness slowly blossomed across the earth, spreading through the tree of life like a gentle awakening. Reproduction is one of life's most elegant solutions to a simple challenge: how to continue. In a world where everything eventually wears down, breaks apart, or fades into the background, living organisms needed a way to keep their patterns going. Reproduction became that method, not through urgency or panic, but through a calm and steady continuity. Life discovered that the best way to remain present was to create new versions of itself, each carrying the same essential instructions with room for gentle variation. This continuity became the heartbeat of evolution, guiding life through the ages with surprising creativity. The earliest forms of reproduction were wonderfully straightforward. A single-celled organism could divide into two, creating a pair of descendants nearly identical to the original. This method, known as asexual reproduction, is efficient, reliable, and incredibly common even today. It is the biological equivalent of making a direct copy of a recipe or duplicating a favorite book page by page. Many microbes still use this method because it is fast and requires no complicated coordination. When conditions are favorable, a population using asexual reproduction can grow with astonishing speed. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8, and suddenly the world seems filled with tiny identical neighbours. Despite its simplicity, asexual reproduction offers everything a cell needs to maintain its lineage. Each generation carries the same genetic instructions, ensuring stability and consistency. But this stability comes with a trade-off. Without the mixing of genetic material, diversity grows slowly. If a disease or environmental shift threatens one member of the population, it may threaten them all. Still, for many organisms living in stable environments, asexual reproduction is a beautifully efficient way to continue their existence without the need for partners, courtship, or any of the elaborate rituals seen later in evolution. As life grew more complex and environments became more unpredictable, another strategy evolved: sexual reproduction. This method involves combining genetic material from two different individuals, mixing their instructions into a new arrangement. Instead of identical copies, the offspring become unique combinations of their parents' traits. This mixing creates diversity, and diversity is one of life's most powerful tools. The more varied a population is, the more likely it contains individuals capable of surviving unexpected challenges. Sexual reproduction may seem complicated, and in many species it certainly looks that way, especially when elaborate behaviors, displays, or rituals appear. But at its core, the concept is simple. Each parent contributes half of its genetic instructions, and the resulting offspring inherits a blend of both. This blending reshuffles the deck with every generation, ensuring that no two individuals are exactly the same. Diversity strengthens a population by offering multiple approaches to survival, many of which are discovered entirely by chance. Biology has taken this basic idea and run with it in spectacular ways. Some organisms release their reproductive cells into the water and hope that they meet. Others rely on intricate dances, vibrant colours, or subtle chemical signals to attract mates. Some species reproduce seasonally, synchronizing their activities with the cycles of the environment, while others reproduce continuously, taking advantage of any favourable moment. Many plants rely on pollinators, enlisting insects, birds, or even wind to help share their genetic material. In every case, reproduction remains the quiet but essential thread connecting one generation to the next. Soft humour finds its place in this topic because biology often shows an astonishing willingness to experiment. Some organisms can reproduce both sexually and asexually, switching methods depending on the conditions. It is as if life sometimes says, if one strategy works, why not keep a backup just in case? Certain species have dazzling courtship rituals that seem far more elaborate than strictly necessary. Others have reproductive cycles so peculiar that even scientists occasionally pause and wonder at nature's creativity. Across the living world, reproduction comes in countless forms, each one demonstrating life's refusal to limit itself to a single strategy. In every case, the purpose remains continuity. Reproduction extends the line forward, carrying the patterns of one generation into the next with gentle alterations along the way. For organisms that reproduce asexually, the continuity is direct and smooth. For those that reproduce sexually, continuity comes with diversity, offering new arrangements of existing traits. Both methods serve life well, depending on the ecological context. In stable conditions, asexual reproduction thrives. In shifting environments, sexual reproduction often offers greater resilience. It is also worth noting that reproduction is not always about speed. While some species create immense numbers of offspring in a short time, others invest deeply in just a few. A sea turtle may lay dozens of eggs and leave them to the tides, trusting chance to guide their futures. A whale may give birth to only one calf every few years, nurturing it with extraordinary care. Each approach is shaped by the pressures and opportunities of the environment, yet all share the same underlying purpose: continue the lineage, carry the instructions forward, and keep life's story unfolding. One of the quiet truths of reproduction is that it ties all living things into a continuous thread across time. Every organism alive today is the product of an unbroken line of successful reproductions, stretching back to the earliest days of life. Not one gap exists in that chain, not even a single missed generation. The fact that you are here means that in every era, your ancestors, microbial, aquatic, terrestrial, and everything in between, found ways to continue. They reproduce successfully across shifting climates, rising continents, and changing oceans. They pass down the molecular instructions that eventually shaped you. Reproduction also reveals a profound gentleness in life's rhythm. It is not driven by panic or fear, even though survival is at stake. Instead, it unfolds calmly, following the natural cycles of growth and renewal. Flowers open and release pollen into the breeze. Coral reefs release clouds of reproductive cells under moonlit water. Fish migrate vast distances to spawning grounds. Trees drop seeds that drift on air currents or hitch rides on passing animals. These processes do not hurry. They follow a steady cadence shaped by seasons, tides, and ancient biological clocks. Life's inventiveness in this area is matched only by its persistence. Even organisms that seem vulnerable or delicate often achieve remarkable success through reproduction. Tiny spores drift through the air and settle in far-flung places. Seeds lie dormant for years, waiting patiently for a drop of water or a ray of sunlight. Microbes divide quietly and steadily, growing into vast populations that sustain entire ecosystems. Every method, no matter how modest, contributes to the continuity of life. When considering reproduction in this gentle way, it becomes clear that it is not merely a biological process, but a kind of inheritance of hope. Each generation hands its instructions to the next, with the trust that they will carry the lineage forward. The blending of genes in sexual reproduction adds creativity to this hope. exploring new possibilities with each pairing. The faithful copying of genes in asexual reproduction adds stability, ensuring that successful adaptations continue unchanged. As you imagine the long history of life reproducing, from ancient single-celled organisms to the complex creatures of today, you may sense the continuity flowing through the ages. Every organism is both a moment in time and a bridge to the future. Reproduction is life's quiet way of saying, here is what worked before, and here is room to try something new. It is through this balance between constancy and variation that life continues its endless story, generation after generation, across the changing landscapes of Earth. Diversity is evolution's quiet masterpiece, painted not in sudden strokes but in countless small adjustments made across the expanse of deep time. When you look at the living world, at forests filled with layered canopies, oceans humming with hidden life, deserts dotted with resilient plants, and skies crossed by wings of every shape, you are seeing the long, patient work of evolution, exploring what is possible. Diversity is not an accident. It is the natural outcome of life adapting, branching, experimenting, and responding to the countless pressures and opportunities offered by Earth's ever-changing landscape. To understand how such variety emerges, it helps to begin with speciation, the gentle process by which one species becomes two. Despite its monumental consequences, speciation is not dramatic. It often starts quietly when a population is divided by geography, behavior, or ecological preference. Imagine a group of organisms separated by a rising mountain range, a shifting river, or even a change in climate. Over generations, each group faces different challenges. They adapt to their local environments, and these adaptations gradually shape their bodies, behaviors, and abilities. Eventually, the differences become so pronounced that the two groups can no longer interbreed. At that moment, a new species has formed, not through any sudden event, but through slow, steady divergence. Speciation is nature's way of creating branching paths in the story of life. Each branch carries its own possibilities. Some species remain similar for long periods, maintaining stable forms because their environments remain steady. Others diverge rapidly, pushed by strong pressures, or drawn toward new opportunities. Over millions of years, these branching events accumulate, creating the tree of life with its countless limbs and twigs, each representing a lineage that has explored its own evolutionary journey. One of the most captivating expressions of diversity arises through adaptive radiations. These occur when a single ancestral species suddenly encounters a wealth of new ecological opportunities. Perhaps a volcanic island forms, blank and untouched, waiting for life to arrive. Perhaps a mass extinction clears ecological niches, leaving openings for survivors to expand into roles they had never occupied before. When these opportunities appear, evolution becomes unusually inventive. A single ancestral species may diversify into many, each adapted to a different way of living. Some may specialize in climbing trees, others in digging burrows, others in swimming, gliding, or feeding on unusual resources. Over time, this explosion of forms creates an entire suite of species, all tracing back to the same humble beginning. Adaptive radiations reveal a truth about evolution. Given space and opportunity, life becomes exuberantly creative, exploring the possibilities of form and function as if delighted by its own imagination. Ecological pressures also play a central role in shaping diversity. These pressures can come from predators, climate, food availability, competition, or even the presence of other species. A bird with a slightly longer beak might reach nectar hidden more deeply in flowers. A fish with a flatter body might slip into narrow crevices for safety. A plant with leaves that angle toward the light might grow more efficiently in shaded environments. These adjustments, small at first, accumulate over generations, sculpting organisms in ways that reflect the challenges and opportunities of their surroundings. Sometimes these pressures create surprising forms. In icy regions, animals grow thick coats or accumulate fat for insulation. In hot deserts, plants reduce their leaves to spines to conserve water. In dense forests, bright colours may evolve for communication, while in open oceans, transparency becomes an advantage. The world's environments act like gentle hands, shaping life in ways that mirror their conditions. Over time, the result is diversity, not random, but beautifully suited to the places where organisms live. Life's creativity is on full display when you look across time. In ancient oceans, the first animals experimented with body structures that seem almost whimsical today. Some had armor-like plates, others had soft, leaf-like appendages, some swam with undulating motions, while others crawled across sediment-covered seafloors. As ecosystems grew more complex, predators and prey co-evolved, each influencing the other's design. Shells thickened, spikes appeared, speed increased, vision sharpened. Evolution became a dynamic conversation between organisms and their environments, leading to the extraordinary variety we see today. Diversity also reflects the power of small variations. A minor mutation may alter the shape or function of a protein. That protein may influence how a cell behaves. That cell may change how a tissue develops. That tissue may affect the entire organism. Over long periods, tiny variations create meaningful differences. Evolution works with what it has, making use of existing structures and repurposing them when needed. Wings evolved from forelimbs. Ear bones in mammals evolved from jawbones in ancient reptiles. Feathers, originally evolved for insulation or display, later became tools for flight. Life rarely begins from scratch. It reshapes what already exists, transforming old features into new solutions. What makes diversity even more remarkable is its resilience. Some lineages adapt rapidly, shifting in response to new conditions. Others remain almost unchanged for hundreds of millions of years because their forms continue to serve them well. Horseshoe crabs, for instance, have persisted with relatively few changes, while cichlid fish in certain lakes have diversified into hundreds of species in a comparatively short time. Diversity is not uniform. It ebbs and flows with the environment, reflecting both stability and change across the ages. Humour finds its place here because evolution often seems willing to try almost anything. There are fish that climb waterfalls, plants that trap insects, birds with elaborate dancing rituals, and fungi that glow softly in the dark. Nature creates solutions that are effective, elegant, and sometimes delightfully odd. Diversity arises not from perfection, but from exploration. Evolution does not aim for the best possible form. It simply seeks forms that work well enough to persist. Many of these forms end up being astonishingly well suited to their environments, even when they appear unusual from a human perspective. Diversity also carries deeper meaning. It reflects the history of life, the journeys of countless lineages, and the interplay between organisms and their surroundings. Every species represents a story written across time, a record of challenges faced, environments explored, and opportunities seized. The variety we see today, from microscopic bacteria to towering redwoods and migrating whales, is the living archive of evolution's quiet, persistent creativity. When you take a moment to observe the natural world, whether by watching the pattern of veins in a leaf, the symmetry of a butterfly's wings, or the movement of animals across a landscape, you witness the outcome of millions of generations adapting in their own subtle, patient ways. Diversity is not merely a collection of shapes and colours. It is a testament to life's ability to thrive in countless forms, each shaped by pressures that echo through deep time. As you reflect on this gentle masterpiece, consider how every species fits into the vast tapestry of life. Each one fills a role, interacts with its environment, and contributes to the larger system. Diversity brings stability to ecosystems, allowing them to absorb change and recover from disruption. It also inspires countless moments of wonder, offering glimpses into evolution's imagination. In the quiet unfolding of evolution, diversity stands as one of life's greatest achievements. It shows that from simple beginnings, through slow and steady changes, life can produce an astonishing array of forms. Whether in the depths of the ocean, the heights of mountain ranges, the quiet of forests, or the vastness of open plains, diversity is a celebration of life's endless creativity, written softly but profoundly across the face of the earth. Ecosystems often appear wild and unpredictable at first glance, full of motion and sound and countless interactions unfolding all at once. But beneath the surface they are surprisingly calm in their logic. They operate as quiet networks, each thread linking organisms to one another through the steady flow of energy and the constant cycling of matter. Every forest, coral reef, grassland, lake and desert is a living tapestry woven from relationships. Nothing exists alone. Everything influences something else, often in ways so subtle that the connections are easy to overlook. Yet these connections are what give ecosystems their strength, their balance, and their remarkable resilience. Energy sits at the heart of every ecosystem. It enters most commonly through sunlight, captured by photosynthetic organisms such as plants, algae, and certain bacteria. Like patient collectors, they gather light and turn it into chemical energy, storing it in leaves, stems, roots, or tiny drifting cells in the water. This transformation is the quiet opening of the ecosystem's story. Without it, nothing else could unfold. Energy flows from these primary producers to the organisms that feed on them, then to the predators that feed on those herbivores, and finally to the scavengers and decomposers that break down the remains. At each step, energy is transformed, used, and eventually released as heat drifting back into the atmosphere. Matter, however, follows a different journey. Unlike energy, which flows in one direction, matter cycles. Nutrients move through the living world again and again, shifting forms as they go. A mineral drawn from the soil by a plant may become part of a leaf. When the leaf falls, fungi and bacteria decompose it, returning nutrients to the ground to be used again. Water evaporates into clouds, falls as rain, flows through rivers, and eventually returns to the sea. Carbon cycles between the atmosphere, organisms, and the earth itself in a graceful loop that has continued for billions of years. These cycles are the earth's quiet way of renewing itself, ensuring that life has the materials it needs to continue. Within this flow of energy and matter, organisms shape each other's lives in surprising ways. A tree does not simply grow alone. Its roots share chemical signals with neighbouring plants. Its fallen leaves feed decomposers on the forest floor. The shade it casts creates cooler pockets of air that influence the growth of understory plants. Insects rely on its branches for food or shelter. Birds build nests among its leaves. Even after the tree falls, it becomes a home for fungi and countless small creatures. Every organism, no matter how stationary or solitary it may seem, is engaged in countless interactions that ripple outward. Food webs are one of the clearest illustrations of these interactions. Instead of a simple chain of who eats whom, food webs reveal the complexity of relationships within an ecosystem. A single species may rely on many sources of food, and many species may depend on that same organism. Predators influence the behavior of their prey, which in turn influences the plants those prey feed on. Remove one species from a food web, and the effects can cascade across the entire system. Sometimes the changes are gentle and subtle, other times they are dramatic, reshaping the ecosystem in ways no one could have predicted. Each organism occupies a niche, a quiet role shaped by its behaviors, preferences and interactions with the world. A niche includes what an organism eats, where it lives, how it finds shelter when it is active, and how it contributes to the ecosystem. Two species may appear similar but fit into different niches. This reduces competition and allows many forms of life to coexist in the same place. A nocturnal animal may hunt the same prey that a daytime predator does, but because their active hours differ, they avoid direct conflict. Plants may grow to different heights to capture light at various levels of the forest canopy. Niches help ecosystems maintain balance, distributing life's opportunities among countless participants. Interactions within ecosystems come in many forms. Some are competitive, with organisms vying for resources such as space, water, or nutrients. Others are cooperative. Bees and flowering plants, for example, have a mutually beneficial relationship. Bees gather nectar and pollen for food, while the plants rely on bees to carry their pollen to new flowers. There are also relationships where one species benefits and the other remains unharmed, such as birds that follow large herbivores to catch insects stirred from the grass. Even parasitic relationships, though challenging for the host, play roles in shaping population sizes and maintaining ecological balance. Decomposers deserve special mention because they are the quiet recyclers of the natural world. Fungi, bacteria, and small detritivores break down dead material, returning nutrients to the soil and closing the loop in matter cycling. Without decomposers, ecosystems would grind to a halt under the weight of their own waste. Instead, decomposition transforms fallen leaves, old wood, and the remains of animals into nourishment for new life. It is a reminder that even endings contribute to beginnings, and that every part of the ecosystem has a purpose. Ecosystems are not static. They shift with the seasons, respond to climate, and evolve as species come and go. After a forest fire, pioneer species like grasses and shrubs move in first, stabilizing the soil and creating conditions for young trees to grow. Over time, a mature forest may return, shaped by the history of what came before. In coral reefs, storms may break sections of reef, but new corals soon sprout in the open spaces, creating fresh habitat for fish and invertebrates. Ecosystems adapt to disturbances through cycles of renewal, showing resilience even after significant change. Despite their complexity, ecosystems do not operate chaotically. Their networks provide structure, subtly guiding how energy flows, how matter cycles, and how organisms interact. They are shaped by patterns, some visible and others hidden. Predator populations rise and fall with the availability of prey. Plant communities shift with changes in rainfall. Migrating animals influence ecosystems thousands of kilometers apart. These patterns give ecosystems a rhythm, a sense of order underlying their apparent wildness. Humour finds its place here in the small quirks of ecological relationships. Some plants rely on animals to disperse their seeds, effectively convincing birds to carry their future offspring far away. Certain fungi manipulate insects into climbing to high places before releasing spores, as if the fungi were politely requesting better delivery services. Even the competition among trees can seem oddly polite at times, with roots growing around one another in a quiet negotiation for space. Biology has a playful side, even in the structure of ecosystems. When you look at the world through the lens of ecology, you see that everything is connected. The air you breathe may contain oxygen released by a tree half a world away. The nutrients in your food may have once flowed through soil shaped by microbes working tirelessly out of sight. Rivers carry minerals from mountains to oceans, nourishing plankton that feed creatures as large as whales. These connections are not loud or obvious, but they are powerful. Ecosystems remind us that life is not a collection of isolated individuals. It is a web, a shared space where every organism contributes something and receives something in return. The strength of that web lies in diversity, in the countless interactions that support stability and resilience. When one thread shifts, the others adjust. When one species declines, another may rise. Through these changes, the ecosystem continues. As you imagine ecosystems now, picture them not as chaotic wilderness, but as quiet networks humming with interaction. A forest canopy filtering sunlight, grasslands swaying as grazing animals pass through, tide pools shimmering with life that depends on every rush of water. Each ecosystem is a living conversation carried out over centuries, shaped by energy, matter, and the steady interplay of species. And in this gentle, interconnected world, every organism, from the smallest microbe to the largest tree, belongs to the same shared story, woven together in the web of life. Life rarely goes it alone. Even the organisms that seem most solitary carry companions, collaborators, helpers, and sometimes unwelcome guests. Symbiosis, the intertwining of lives, is one of biology's most striking themes. It is a spectrum of relationships that stretches from deep cooperation to quiet coexistence, to clever exploitation. Through these relationships, ecosystems take shape, species evolve new abilities, and life becomes richer and more complex. If nature were a university dormitory, it would be one where everyone has at least 3 roommates, many of whom moved in uninvited, yet somehow became essential to daily life. Symbiosis comes in several forms, and the gentlest among them is mutualism. In mutualistic relationships, both partners benefit. These partnerships often emerge slowly, shaped by tiny improvements that become profound over time. One of the best-known examples is the relationship between flowering plants and their pollinators. Bees gather nectar and pollen for nourishment, while plants rely on bees to ferry their pollen from flower to flower. It is a system so elegant that it reshaped entire landscapes, filling them with colour, fragrance, and movement. Hummingbirds, bats, butterflies, and even some lizards have joined this grand exchange, each adapting in its own way to the plants it visits. Another form of mutualism occurs underground, hidden from view. Many plants form alliances with fungi in the soil, creating networks known as mycorrhizae. The fungi extend far into the earth, gathering nutrients such as phosphorus and nitrogen. In return, the plants share some of the sugars they produce through photosynthesis. These relationships knit forests and grasslands together. A tree may share resources with its neighbours through fungal networks, helping seedlings survive or supporting older trees that are struggling. The soil becomes a quiet communication system where nutrients flow like whispered encouragements between living things. There are mutualistic relationships in the ocean too. Coral reefs depend on tiny algae living within coral cells. These algae provide energy through photosynthesis, while the coral offers shelter and nutrients. When the relationship falters due to stress, the coral loses its colour and strength, leading to bleaching. It is a reminder that even the most beautiful ecosystems can hinge on partnerships so delicate that a small shift in temperature can unravel them. Some mutualisms seem almost whimsical. Certain fish set up cleaning stations on reefs, where larger fish come to have parasites removed. The cleaners gain food, the clients gain relief. Both leave satisfied. Even land animals sometimes act as mutualists. Oxpeckers perch on large mammals, removing insects from their skin. Though the relationship is not always perfectly balanced, it often benefits both sides. Nature, it seems, welcomes almost any collaboration that helps organisms thrive. Between mutualism and exploitation lies commensalism, a relationship in which one partner benefits, while the other is neither helped nor harmed. These relationships are surprisingly common. Barnacles attached to whales, hitching rides through nutrient-rich waters without affecting the whale's health. Birds may nest in the branches of trees, gaining shelter without influencing the tree's growth. Remora fish attached to sharks using suction discs, feeding on leftovers from the shark's meals. The shark, unfazed, continues on its way. Commensal relationships often involve one species taking advantage of opportunities created by another without causing trouble. Though commensalism may seem passive, it subtly shapes ecosystems. The organisms involved adapt to one another in small ways. Barnacles evolve structures that hold fast to whales' moving surfaces. Remoras develop flat suction discs rather than typical fins. These adjustments show how relationships, even when one-sided, influence evolutionary paths. Nature rewards any strategy that allows an organism to thrive, even if it simply means catching a free ride. At the other end of the spectrum lies parasitism, a relationship in which one organism benefits at the expense of another. Parasites are often portrayed in dramatic terms, yet they are integral parts of ecosystems. They regulate populations, prevent any one species from becoming too dominant, and influence evolutionary change. Parasites come in every imaginable form. Some live on the surface of their hosts, feeding on skin or blood. Others live inside, altering behavior, stealing nutrients, or manipulating immune responses. Even plants can be parasites, drawing resources from the roots or stems of their neighbours. Parasitism can be subtle. Some parasites cause so little harm that their hosts barely notice. Others are more burdensome. A parasitic worm might reside in a bird's digestive system, or a mite might irritate the skin of a mammal. Yet even these challenging relationships drive adaptation. Hosts evolve defences such as thicker skin, better immune responses, or avoidance behaviours. Parasites evolve countermeasures. This ongoing interplay forms a quiet arms race that shapes the biology of both partners. Some parasites display astonishing ingenuity. There are fungi that infect insects and alter their behaviour, causing them to climb to elevated locations before releasing spores. There are wasps that lay eggs inside caterpillars, allowing their larvae to feed from within. There are fish that mimic cleaner species, tricking larger fish into lowering their guard. These relationships may seem harsh, but they reveal nature's readiness to explore every possible niche, even those that rely on intricate deception or manipulation. Despite the differences between mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism, all forms of symbiosis reflect a deeper truth. Life is shaped by relationships. cooperation can lead to lush ecosystems, while exploitation can maintain balance by preventing any one species from overwhelming the rest. Even neutral relationships where one partner benefits quietly contribute to the structure of communities. Symbiosis reveals that nature is not a collection of isolated individuals. It is a network of connections that ripple outward. Cooperation and conflict coexist in ecosystems. Pollinators and flowers may share resources, while predators and prey engage in constant evolutionary tension. Trees compete for sunlight even as their roots share nutrients with neighbours through fungal networks. Parasites challenge their hosts, while commensal organisms take advantage of open opportunities. These relationships intertwine, shaping the lives of organisms in ways that make ecosystems stable, dynamic, and full of surprising interactions. Gentle humour fits naturally into the topic because many symbiotic relationships resemble the quirks of living with roommates. Some partners share tasks evenly, like plants and fungi trading nutrients. Others simply borrow space without contributing much, like barnacles clinging to whales. And some partners overstep boundaries, like parasites that take far more than they return. If nature kept a guest list, it would likely be very long and the rules would be flexible at best. Yet this crowded, interconnected living arrangement is what allows ecosystems to flourish. As you picture symbiosis unfolding across forests, oceans, and grasslands, imagine the subtle threads linking organisms together. A tree feeding a fungus feeding a tree, a bird nesting in branches, a parasite nudging its host into strange behaviour, a pollinator moving from flower to flower, distributing life with every visit. These interactions, nurturing, neutral, or challenging, form the foundation of ecosystems. Symbiosis shows that life thrives through connection. Whether through gentle cooperation or clever exploitation, organisms are constantly influencing each other's paths. These intertwined lives create the complexity, beauty, and balance of the natural world, and through their countless relationships, they remind us that every living thing, no matter how small or solitary it may appear, is part of a larger story unfolding all around it. Biology is shaped not only by molecules, cells, and ecosystems, but by something far more subtle: time. Every living organism carries clocks within clocks, quiet mechanisms that guide waking and resting, growing and healing, migrating and blooming. These internal rhythms allow life to stay in sync with a world that changes predictably. The rising and setting of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the long arc of development from birth to maturity. Biological time is the soft metronome behind every heartbeat, every leaf unfurling, every bird taking flight at the right moment. It is one of life's most elegant and least visible inventions. Perhaps the most familiar of these biological clocks is the circadian rhythm, the roughly 24-hour cycle that influences sleep, metabolism, hormone release, and countless other processes. Even the simplest organisms show signs of this rhythmic behavior. Tiny microbes drift in the ocean, rising toward the surface each morning to soak in sunlight, and sinking deeper at night to avoid predators. Plants adjust the opening and closing of their leaves in tune with sunrise and sunset. Animals follow patterns of activity and rest that reflect the daily rotation of the earth. These rhythms persist even in complete darkness, revealing that the clock runs from within, guided by genes and proteins that rise and fall in repeating cycles. In humans, circadian rhythms shape when you feel alert and when you feel sleepy, when your body is most prepared to digest food, when your temperature fluctuates, and even when your immune system works at its best. This internal timing is so strong that when it drifts out of alignment, perhaps after travelling across time zones or staying awake much later than usual, you can feel the effects immediately. It is as though your body has a favourite schedule and politely insists that you follow it. At the centre of this rhythm is a small region in the brain that keeps time with remarkable accuracy, synchronizing itself each day to the cycle of light and dark. But biological time extends far beyond the daily cycle. Many organisms follow seasonal clocks, responding to the slow shift from winter to spring or autumn to winter. These seasonal rhythms guide migration, reproduction, and hibernation. Birds begin long journeys across continents not because they check weather forecasts, but because their internal clocks sense changes in day length. Plants bloom when the days reach a certain duration, ensuring that pollinators will be active when their flowers open. Even trees prepare for winter by shedding leaves according to seasonal timing, a process so reliable that forests seem to breathe together in cycles of growth and rest. Some animals time their reproduction to ensure their young are born when food is abundant or when temperatures are mild. Certain species of insects emerge only during specific weeks of the year, synchronizing their entire life cycles to the seasonal clock. The vast migrations of animals, from monarch butterflies that travel across multiple generations to whales that cross oceans, are guided by these internal calendars. Biological time helps them anticipate the world rather than merely react to it. Even within an individual organism, many forms of timing unfold simultaneously. Developmental timing is one of the most intricate. A seed does not sprout the moment it touches soil. It waits for cues such as moisture, temperature, or light. A caterpillar grows until a precise moment when internal signals trigger metamorphosis. Human development follows its own timing as well, from the formation of organs in the womb to the unfolding of childhood milestones to the gradual shifts that accompany adulthood and aging. These processes are guided by internal clocks that measure more than hours or seasons. They measure biological readiness. Some of these developmental clocks operate on astonishing schedules. There are plants that wait years before blooming, releasing their flowers only when certain environmental and internal conditions align. There are cicadas that emerge from the soil after 13 or 17 years, synchronized with such precision that entire forests suddenly hum with their chorus. These rhythms are not guesses. They are deeply encoded patterns of timekeeping honed through evolution. They allow organisms to avoid predators, take advantage of resources, or survive difficult conditions. Cells too operate according to internal clocks. The cell cycle, which guides how and when a cell divides, follows a carefully timed sequence. Proteins rise and fall in predictable waves, ensuring that DNA is copied at the right moment, that the cell prepares for division, and that it completes the process safely. This timing prevents chaos within tissues and keeps growth under control. Even healing after an injury follows a rhythmic progression, with certain cells activating at specific times to repair tissue, rebuild structures, and quiet inflammation. On an even smaller scale, some molecular processes oscillate in ways that resemble tiny ticking clocks. Hormones are released in pulses that follow daily or monthly rhythms. Metabolic pathways speed up or slow down based on the time of day. Neurons fire in rhythmic patterns that influence sleep cycles and attention. Biological time is not a single rhythm but a symphony of overlapping rhythms, each one contributing to the harmony of life. Humour finds its place here because many of these rhythms display a kind of stubborn loyalty to their schedules. Anyone who has tried to convince their body to wake up earlier than usual knows how resistant circadian rhythms can be. Plants, too, keep their routines with unwavering dedication. If you ever bring a houseplant into a room with artificial light at unexpected times, it may look slightly offended by the disruption. Even animals in zoos, far from their natural environments, often follow the timing encoded within them, waiting for migrations that no longer occur or seeking seasonal conditions that no longer apply. Biological time also shapes ecosystems. The timing of flowering plants influences pollinators. The timing of insect hatches influences birds. The timing of rainfall influences entire food webs. When rhythms align, ecosystems flow smoothly. When they fall out of sync, perhaps due to changes in climate, disruptions ripple outward. Flowers may bloom before pollinators arrive. Birds may migrate too early or too late for peak. Food availability. Even small shifts in timing can influence the delicate balance of ecosystems. What makes biological time so extraordinary is that it connects every scale of life, from genes to organisms to entire landscapes. Inside you, molecules keep rhythm with the turning of the earth. Around you, plants and animals follow their own clocks, creating the seasonal patterns you recognize each year. Across the planet, ecosystems respond to the timing of rains, winds, and sunlight. These clocks help life anticipate change, plan ahead, and coordinate actions that would otherwise be impossible. As you imagine the rhythms of biological time, picture invisible clocks ticking softly in every corner of nature. Picture the daily opening and closing of flowers, the rising songs of birds at dawn, the steady pulse of your own heartbeat, and the long migrations of animals guided by ancient calendars encoded in their cells. Picture the developmental steps that unfold in perfect sequence, shaping everything from embryos to forests. Biological time is the quiet architecture behind life's motion. It ensures that everything happens not simply in the right way, but at the right moment. From the smallest oscillations inside a cell to the grand cycles that guide entire species, time structures the living world with gentle precision. It reminds us that life moves not only through space, but also through rhythm, a continuous dance of clocks within clocks, keeping pace with the turning earth. Life does not simply inhabit the earth, it participates in a long continuous conversation with it. The planet shapes the living world through climate, geology, and the movement of air and water. In return, life reshapes the planet in ways both subtle and profound. Every organism, from microbes drifting in the ocean to forests stretching across continents, plays a part in this ongoing dialogue. It is a conversation carried out not in words, but in cycles, feedback loops, and quiet changes that accumulate over millions of years. The early Earth was a very different place. Its atmosphere was thick with gases that would be toxic to most organisms alive today. Its oceans were rich in minerals but lacked oxygen. Volcanoes shaped the landscape with eruptions that released heat and chemicals into the air and sea. The climate swung between extremes, influenced by the sun's changing brightness and the movement of continents. In this dynamic environment, life emerged and then began to respond to the conditions around it. But as soon as life appeared, the planet itself started to change in response. One of the most striking examples of this two-way dialogue is the rise of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. Early photosynthetic microbes released oxygen as a byproduct, slowly altering the composition of the air over millions of years. At first, that oxygen reacted with minerals in the oceans and crust, but eventually it began to accumulate in the atmosphere. This was not a small change. It transformed the chemistry of the planet, allowing new forms of metabolism to evolve and making complex life possible. The atmosphere that humans breathe today is, in many ways, a creation of ancient microbes that had no idea they were engineering the future. The oceans also participate in this exchange. Their temperature, salinity, and currents influence life at every scale. Plankton flourish where nutrients rise from deep waters. Coral reefs depend on warm, clear seas. Kelp forests sway in nutrient-rich currents. Yet life shapes the oceans in return. Plankton capture enormous amounts of carbon from the atmosphere, pulling it into the ocean depths when they die and sink. Coral reefs create vast structures that alter water flow and provide habitat for animals. Even the way waves break against coastlines can change through the presence of living things like mangroves and seagrass. Climate, too, is shaped by life. Plants absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, influencing the temperature and composition of the atmosphere. Forests can create rainfall patterns by releasing moisture through their leaves. Algae in the ocean influence cloud formation by releasing particles that act as cloud seeds. These effects may seem small, but over long timescales they shape weather patterns, seasons, and the distribution of ecosystems. The planet responds to life even as life adapts to the planet. Geology participates in this exchange in unexpected ways. Mountain ranges rise and erode, releasing minerals into rivers and oceans that feed biological processes. Volcanic eruptions fertilize soil with nutrients. The movement of tectonic plates shifts continents, creating new climates, new habitats, and new evolutionary pressures. Life does not passively accept these changes. It responds. When continents drift toward the poles, organisms adapt to cooler climates. When oceans open or close, life follows currents to new environments. When volcanic islands form, species arrive and diversify, shaping entirely new ecosystems. Over deep time, the movement of land and sea becomes intertwined with the movement of life. Feedback loops arise naturally in this two-way dialogue. Some loops stabilize the planet. For example, when carbon dioxide increases in the atmosphere, plants may grow more rapidly, absorbing some of that carbon and moderating the temperature. When temperatures rise, chemical reactions involving rocks and rainwater speed up, removing carbon from the atmosphere and cooling the planet. These balancing loops help keep Earth within the narrow range that allows life to flourish. Other feedback loops can push the planet toward new conditions. During periods when plant life expands across continents, large amounts of carbon can be pulled from the atmosphere, cooling the climate and potentially leading to ice ages. Conversely, when forests shrink or oceans warm, carbon can be released back into the air, raising temperatures. These shifts demonstrate how life does not merely adapt to the environment, it can also drive environmental change. Microbes, though often invisible, play some of the most powerful roles in shaping the planet. They cycle nitrogen through soil, making it available to plants. They influence methane levels, affecting the greenhouse effect. They break down organic material and recycle nutrients through ecosystems. Even the smell of rain after a long dry spell can be traced to compounds released by microbes in the soil. Life's influence extends into details so small they are easy to overlook, yet they ripple outward to affect global systems. Over millions of years, life has become a planetary force. The presence of forests alters wind patterns and rainfall. The spread of grasses helped shape the evolution of grazing animals. The appearance of burrowing creatures changed soil structure and nutrient flow. Even the formation of limestone cliffs and chalk hills can be traced to the shells of tiny marine organisms that accumulated over countless generations. Life writes its story into the physical features of the planet, carving its presence into stone. This two-way dialogue is full of subtlety. Many organisms engineer their environments without any intention. Beavers create ponds that support entire communities of plants and animals. Earthworms enrich soil simply by moving through it. Termites build mounds that influence airflow and moisture, creating microclimates within ecosystems. Coral polyps slowly build reefs that reshape coastlines. These organisms do not set out with grand plans, yet their actions create lasting impacts on the world around them. Humour finds its place here, because if nature were to send out invitations to a planning committee for Earth's environment, microbes, plants and animals would have been attending quietly for billions of years, reshaping the agenda without waiting for permission. Biological engineering's not bold or flashy. It is gentle, persistent, and infinitely creative. Given time, life can turn bare rock into forests, shallow seas into reefs, and empty landscapes into ecosystems woven with relationships. Modern ecosystems reflect this long conversation. Rainforests create their own humidity. Grasslands maintain their open spaces through the grazing of animals. Wetlands filter water through plants and microbes working together. Each environment emerges from interactions between life and the physical world, shaped by feedback loops that stabilize or transform landscapes. Even today the dialogue continues. Climate influences life, and life influences climate. Oceans shape the atmosphere, and living things shape the oceans. Mountains, rivers, winds, and currents interact with plants, animals, and microbes. Everything responds, everything contributes. The planet is not a backdrop for life. It is a partner in a long, intricate exchange. As you imagine this conversation unfolding through deep time, picture the planet breathing with life's influence, the colours of the Earth shifting as organisms evolve, spread, and reshape their environments. Picture the soft pull of feedback loops, the exchange of gases, the cycling of nutrients, and the slow accumulation of biological fingerprints across every landscape. The dialogue between life and the environment is quiet, continuous, and profound. It is this reciprocity that makes Earth unique, a planet shaped by life, and life shaped by a planet that listens and responds. Together, they have co-authored a story billions of years long, one that continues to unfold with every rising tide, growing forest, drifting cloud, and tiny microbe living unseen beneath your feet. Death, though often imagined as an ending, is one of nature's most essential beginnings. In the living world, nothing truly disappears. Instead, everything transforms. The passing of an organism becomes the quiet opening of countless opportunities for others. Nutrients are returned to the soil, energy flows into new forms, and the cycle of life continues with gentle, rhythmic certainty. Far from being a void, death is one of the busiest and most important processes on Earth. A natural recycling system that ensures life never runs out of the materials it needs. Decomposition is the heart of this transformation. When an organism's life comes to a close, a community of tiny workers arrives almost immediately. These workers are not mournful. They are efficient, patient, and essential. Bacteria and fungi begin the slow, careful process of breaking down tissues. They release enzymes that dismantle complex molecules into simpler ones, gradually freeing nutrients that were once locked inside bones, leaves, shells, or skin. Insects and other small creatures join the process, each contributing in ways perfectly suited to their abilities. It may seem like quiet work, but it is the foundation of every ecosystem's renewal. This process is gentle, despite its reputation. Rather than sweeping something away, decomposition unravels it with care, returning each piece to the earth in a form that other living things can use. Carbon becomes available for plants to incorporate into their leaves. Nitrogen returns to the soil, enriching it for future generations. Minerals, once part of bodies or shells, become part of landscapes again. Decomposition is not destruction, it is release. Of course, biology finds ways to make even decomposition an astonishing collaboration. Fungi spread thin networks through fallen logs, turning wood into soft, rich soil. Bacteria thrive in environments as varied as ocean floors and forest floors, each species specializing in a particular step of the breakdown. Detritivores, creatures that feed on dead material, include everything from earthworms to crabs to beetles. These organisms quietly convert the remains of life into nourishment, blending their efforts into a seamless whole. If ecosystems had maintenance crews, decomposers would be the dedicated team working around the clock, tidying away the old to make room for the new. As decomposition unfolds, nutrients cycle through the environment. Every nutrient used to build a living organism originally came from somewhere else. Calcium in bones may have once been part of a seashell on the ocean floor. Iron in blood may have been released from ancient rocks. Carbon in leaves and mussels likely began its journey in the atmosphere. Death allows these nutrients to re-enter the cycle. Without this process, ecosystems would quickly run out of essential materials. Life depends on the constant return of nutrients, and decomposition ensures that nothing is ever truly lost. The cycling of nutrients offers a quiet reminder of how interconnected everything is. A fallen tree becomes nourishment for fungi, which support insects, which feed birds, which carry seeds to new places, which grow into forests that one day fall and feed the soil again. A single life becomes part of countless other lives through this cycle. The continuity is seamless, threaded through time in a way that makes beginnings and endings blend together. Framing death as transformation helps reveal its deeper role in evolution. If every organism lived indefinitely, ecosystems would fill to the brim. Resources would be strained, opportunities would be limited, and adaptation would slow. Death creates space for new generations, new genetic combinations, and new possibilities. It maintains balance, allowing species to shift, diversify, and explore new ways of living. Though the idea may seem somber at first, it reflects one of nature's most profound truths. Life flows forward because each generation makes room for the next. This continuity across generations gives death a softer meaning. When an organism dies, its physical form returns to the earth, but its lineage continues through its offspring and through the ripple effects it had during its life. The nutrients it absorbed become part of new plants. The energy it carried disperses into other beings. Even its behaviors, learned or instinctive, may echo through descendants. Life is a tapestry where each thread contributes to the whole, even after it's been woven in. Many organisms have built their lives round this cycle. Vultures elegantly clean landscapes by consuming remains that would otherwise linger. Certain beetles specialize in rolling away fragments of the past to feed their young. Forests rely on fallen trees, known as nurse logs, to create fertile ground for seedlings. Coral reefs grow on the remains of earlier reefs, layer upon layer, building vast structures shaped by centuries of life, death, and renewal. Everywhere you look, ecosystems embrace death as part of their architecture. Humour gently fits into this topic because nature occasionally displays an almost practical attitude toward recycling. A fallen tree becomes a bustling apartment complex for fungi, moss, insects, and small mammals. A single decomposing leaf might become a feast for dozens of tiny organisms, each taking its share and passing the rest along. If nature wrote a recycling policy, it would be remarkably efficient and much more comprehensive than anything humans have managed to design. Even on the grandest scale, death has shaped the planet. Ancient mass extinctions cleared ecological space for new groups of organisms to flourish. Entire eras of life unfolded because earlier ones came to an end. This is not to diminish the loss involved, but to recognize that Earth's history is full of cycles, some slow, some sudden, each one leading to new forms and new expressions of life. The world we know today, from birds in the sky to forests on land, owes its existence to the countless transformations that came before. On the smallest scale, death supports life by creating the richness needed for new growth. Soil, that dark and humble substance underfoot, is almost entirely the product of decomposition. It holds the remains of leaves, roots, microbes, insects and minerals from ages past. Every forest floor, every field, every garden thrives because of this intricate blend. Without decomposition, soil would vanish, plants could not grow, and ecosystems would collapse. Death, quietly and steadily, builds the foundations for life to rise again. When viewed through this lens, death becomes less about disappearance and more about change. Life continues not despite death, but because of it. Bodies return to the earth, nutrients re-enter cycles, ecosystems renew themselves, and generations unfold. Each living thing participates in this gentle exchange, giving and receiving across time. The boundary between life and death softens into a continuum where everything becomes part of something else. As you imagine this cycle, picture leaves falling in autumn, not as endings but as promises. Picture a forest nourished by past generations. Picture the soil beneath your feet, rich with history. Picture the way every breath you take includes oxygen produced by organisms long gone. Death is transformation, a quiet shift from one form to another, ensuring that life never ceases its patient, graceful renewal. In this way, death is not nature's failure or flaw. It is one of nature's greatest systems, a recycling process so elegant and essential that without it, the world would fall silent. Instead, the world continues to grow, bloom, and evolve, carried forward by the unseen work of countless organisms returning their gifts to the earth. Intelligence is often imagined as something rare, perched delicately atop the human mind like a fragile crown. But in truth, intelligence is woven through the living world in countless forms. It appears wherever life has found value in sensing, remembering, adapting, and solving the small puzzles that shape survival. Some forms of intelligence are obvious, expressed in problem-solving and communication. Others are quieter, hidden in the behaviors of creatures that do not speak or build tools, but still navigate their worlds with remarkable skill. Intelligence, at its core, is life thinking about life, responding to challenges through networks of cells, neurons, or chemical signals that allow organisms to meet the moment with something more than instinct alone. In its simplest expression, intelligence emerges from the ability to sense the environment and make decisions based on those sensations. Even single-celled organisms show a modest form of this. A bacterium can move toward nutrients and away from harm, using chemical gradients as guides. Slime molds, though lacking a brain entirely, can solve mazes by exploring all paths and retracting from the ones that lead nowhere. They extend their networks along routes that offer the best nourishment. leaving behind a pattern that echoes the logic of decision-making. These tiny behaviours remind us that intelligence begins long before complex nervous systems appear. As organisms gain neurons, the potential for intelligence expands. Nerve cells link together into networks, allowing signals to travel faster and farther. Early nervous systems were simple, consisting of webs spread through the body like soft wiring. These networks allowed creatures to coordinate movement, respond to touch, and navigate their environments with increasing sophistication. From these beginnings, intelligence grew not through sudden leaps, but through gradual additions and refinements. More neurons allowed more possibilities. More connections allowed patterns, recall, and learning. Memory becomes one of the defining features of intelligence. A creature that can remember where food was found or where danger lurked has an advantage. Many animals, from tiny insects to large mammals, carry memories that guide their behavior. Bees remember the location of flowers and communicate it to their hive mates through intricate dances. Birds remember migratory routes stretching across entire continents, finding their way year after year even when landscapes change. Fish remember safe hiding places in reefs. Octopuses remember which human fed them and which human startled them, sometimes directing a well-aimed splash of water in the appropriate direction with almost theatrical clarity. Communication is another powerful component of intelligence, and it appears everywhere in the natural world. Ants leave chemical trails for others to follow, guiding their colony to food sources. Wolves communicate through body language and howls that carry across great distances. Songbirds share information through melodies, teaching their young the tunes that define their territory. Dolphins exchange clicks and whistles that may function like names. Even trees, through underground fungal networks, send chemical signals to their neighbours when insects attack, allowing nearby trees to prepare defences. Intelligence often flows through groups, not just individuals, creating shared systems of awareness. Some animals display intelligence so striking that it challenges human assumptions. Crows and ravens use tools, solving puzzles that require multiple steps. They recognize faces, hold grudges, and sometimes perform acts that seem playful, as if exploring problems simply for the joy of it. Elephants show deep emotional awareness, comforting distressed members of their herd and pausing when they encounter the bones of their own kind, touching them with gentle movements that hint at memory and recognition. Octopuses manipulate objects, escape enclosures, and seem to improvise solutions as they go. Their intelligence comes from a body-wide network of neurons, creating a kind of distributed thinking that differs from human cognition but achieves remarkable results. Humour belongs here, because intelligence in nature sometimes expresses itself in ways that look suspiciously like mischief. Parrots may imitate household noises in perfect detail, perhaps just to see how humans react. Sea otters use rocks as tools, juggling them casually when not cracking open shellfish. Certain monkeys learn how to trade items for food, sometimes escalating their skills to include stealing objects of value purely to negotiate better rewards. Intelligence is not only practical, it often appears to carry a spark of curiosity, a willingness to explore the world beyond immediate necessity. Humans, of course, sit at one extreme of this spectrum with brains capable of abstraction, language, imagination, and long-term planning. But even human intelligence arises from networks of neurons, responding to the world in familiar ways. The difference is one of degree, not kind. The same principles that allow bees to navigate, birds to remember, and octopuses to manipulate objects also allow humans to create art, solve equations, invent stories, and wonder about the universe. Intelligence is a continuum, not a hierarchy, and each form of life expresses it in ways suited to its needs. Even within the human body, intelligence is not confined to the brain. Networks of cells in the gut respond to food and chemicals with their own patterns of communication. Immune cells identify invaders and adapt their responses based on past encounters. Every corner of biology seems to contain some form of processing, evaluation, or decision-making. Intelligence is not a single property, but a collection of abilities that emerge wherever life organizes itself into systems capable of sensing, learning, and responding. The emergence of intelligence across species reflects the evolutionary value of problem-solving. Environments change, predators adapt, resources shift, and opportunities arise. Organisms that can modify their behavior in real time often survive better than those reliant solely on instinct. Intelligence evolves because it allows flexibility. It allows mistakes to become lessons. It allows creatures to explore, experiment, and find solutions that their ancestors never encountered. Over millions of years, these abilities have spread across the tree of life, appearing in creatures large and small, on land, in the sea, and even in the air. Networks lie at the heart of intelligence. Whether those networks are composed of neurons, chemical signals, or social interactions, their structure allows complexity to emerge from simple components. A single neuron cannot think. 1,000,000 neurons can remember. 1,000,000,000 neurons can imagine. Similarly, a single ant cannot solve a problem beyond its physical abilities, but a colony can achieve feats that seem almost miraculous. Networks amplify awareness, weaving individual responses into collective intelligence. Nature uses this principle everywhere, from the branching veins of leaves to the connectivity of fungal threads to the wiring of animal brains. This inclusive view of intelligence encourages a gentler understanding of the living world. Instead of imagining a single pinnacle of cognition, we see a landscape filled with different ways of knowing. A spider weaving a web shows a kind of craftsmanship shaped by instincts and refined by feedback. A dog recognizing its human companion shows emotional intelligence. A young bird learning to sing shows cultural inheritance. An elephant remembering a distant water source shows spatial awareness and memory. Intelligence appears in many shapes, each one reflecting unique ways of engaging with the world. As you explore these ideas, imagine intelligence spreading through the living world like soft light. It glows in the problem-solving of crows, the navigation of sea turtles, the cooperative hunting of dolphins, the dances of bees, the communication of trees, and the curiosity of octopuses exploring their surroundings with delicate arms. It appears wherever life has found value in thinking, remembering, or adapting. It reminds us that the earth is not only alive but aware in countless small ways. In this gentle view, intelligence becomes one of life's most remarkable creations, not because it belongs to one species, but because it belongs to many. It is life reflecting on itself, exploring possibilities, and responding to challenges with creativity and care. And as long as life continues, intelligence in all its forms will continue to grow, adapt, and express itself through the living networks that connect everything on Earth. Life's story is vast, but when you trace its threads carefully, you begin to feel how quietly everything unfolds. From the first shimmering molecules learning to copy themselves, all the way to forests breathing in rhythm with the seasons and animals navigating the world through memory and light. Life reveals itself not as a frantic scramble, but as a continuous, gentle pattern. Each chapter you've wandered through has carried a different shape of that pattern. Cells organizing themselves, energy flowing, minds awakening, ecosystems weaving their connections. Yet all of it belongs to a single, steady movement that has lasted for billions of years. As you rest here at the end of this journey, the details naturally soften. What remains is the feeling of life as a calm, ongoing conversation between organisms and the world around them, a shaping and reshaping, a listening and responding. Life is not a single invention or a single moment. It is a vast, patient unfolding, one that continues even now in places you may never see, in creatures you may never meet, and in the quiet workings inside your own cells. There is something comforting in that continuity. You're not separate from the biology you have just explored. You belong to it, carried by the same rules, supported by the same flows of energy and matter, held within the same long web of inheritance stretching back to the earliest days of the earth. Thank you for spending this peaceful time exploring the natural world. Your presence here, listening gently, adds your own quiet thread to this long tapestry. It is easy to forget, in the rush of daily tasks, that every breath you take is part of a cycle shaped by forests and oceans, that every step you take is supported by soils enriched by generations of life returning to the earth, that every moment of awareness is built from networks born from ancient cells, learning to sense the world. Being reminded of these connections can be grounding, a way of coming back to yourself and to the steady rhythms that surround you. If you are listening in the stillness of the evening, you may feel your body settling as the ideas drift and fade. Let them soften. Let them become sensations rather than thoughts. These stories of life are here to offer understanding, yes, but also reassurance. A reminder that the world is full of quiet processes carrying on without haste, supporting one another in balanced, dependable ways. You do not need to hold on to every detail. You can simply rest inside the feeling of continuity, knowing that life has always found a way to move gently forward. If sleep begins to tug at you, you're welcome to follow it. Let the rhythm of your breathing join the rhythm of everything else. Let the day fall away, knowing that the same patterns shaping forests, oceans, and countless living things have been guiding the world long before you arrived and will continue long after. You're part of something steady, something that does not rush. And if you remain awake a little longer, that is fine too. There is calmness in being here, at the quiet edge of a long story, where the complexity settles into simplicity. Life is not a puzzle to be solved tonight. It is a presence to feel, a soft current that holds you as securely as it holds every creature and every landscape on Earth. As this journey comes to a close, picture the planet in its nighttime calm. Oceans exhaling mist, forests shifting softly in the dark, distant deserts cooling beneath the stars. Picture the countless living things, large and small, breathing in their own rhythms. Picture the whole world as one quiet, steady organism, resting and renewing under a dark sky. Everything breathing together, everything held in the same deep, patient stillness. And in that stillness you can rest too.